Good afternoon, members. Welcome to the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor. Mr. Secretary, will you please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Carlton. Assemblywoman Considine.
Present.
Assemblywoman Dickman.
Here.
Assemblywoman Duran.
Here.
Assemblyman Flores.
Present.
Assemblyman Frierson.
Here.
Assemblywoman Hardy.
Here.
Assemblywoman Kasama.
Here.
Assemblywoman Martinez.
Present.
Assemblywoman Marzola.
Here.
Assemblyman O'Neill.
Here.
Assemblywoman Tolles.
Here.
Chair Howdigi.
Present. Thank you, Mr. Secretary. If you would please also note that Vice Chair Carlton has joined the meeting as well, and all committee members are present. Welcome, members and audience tuning in over the internet. As always, I will just go over some quick committee housekeeping. Please remember that all exhibits, written testimony, and amendments must be submitted by noon the day before the committee meeting. Persons wishing to provide testimony or attend the meeting virtually must pre-register on the legislature's website. The public is strongly encouraged to submit written testimony in advance by emailing the committee manager for Commerce and Labor. Zoom chat is reserved for committee business only. Members, please remember to keep your camera on at all times. This will help ensure that we have a quorum unless you are stepping away for non-committee related business. Members and presenters, please remember to be muted at all times. Unmute yourself to speak and then promptly mute yourself when you are done. Thank you, everyone. And on today's agenda, we have 4 bills for hearing. I do want to give everyone the lay of the land because we will be taking the bills out of order. I will be starting with Assembly Bill 391. I will be starting with Assembly Bill 375 first, followed by Assembly Bill 391. Then we will be hearing AB 290 and the last AB 277. Thank you. Thank you for those who are listening in case you wanted to, you were here for one of the later meetings, at least you know what time we will be hearing those meetings. With that, I would like to open the bill hearing on Assembly Bill 375, and I believe we have Assemblymember Titus here to present. Welcome to the Committee on Commerce and Labor. When you are ready, you can begin, Dr. Titus.
Thank you, Chair and members of the Assembly Commerce and Labor. I am Assemblywoman Robin Titus, and I represent District 38, which is all of Churchill County and most of Lyon County. I'm here today presenting Assembly Bill 375, which revises provisions relating to the operation of craft distilleries, state distilleries, and wineries. Nevada is home to breweries, wineries, and distilleries that have brought home coveted spirit awards. There are numerous breweries essential creating artisanal and craft brews in each region of Nevada. Wineries in Nevada are located throughout the state, including Pahrump and Fallon, producing high-quality estate bottled vino. We are home to 2 of the United States' 3 estate distilleries. This industry is rapidly expanding, and we need to allow more flexibility to do businesses in Nevada. As many of you know, in order to operate a winery or craft distillery in Nevada, a business must first obtain permits and licenses from various government agencies, including the U.S. Department of Taxation, the Department of Treasury, Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau, and Nevada's Department of Taxation, as well as meet local licensing requirements. Recent changes to Nevada law have made the prospect of opening and operating a winery in Nevada more attractive. For example, in 2015, this legislative body made many changes to Nevada's winery laws by creating new opportunities for wineries to operate in the state. While there were no changes to the licensing or permitting requirements of a winery, it did change the scope of a winery's permitted operation. The measure expanded where wineries could operate in the state by permitting wineries in Clark and Washoe counties, expressly permitting wineries to produce bottle, blend, and age wine, and added restrictions concerning the wine and other alcoholic beverage a winery can sell at retail. Even with these changes, vintners, brewers, and distillers continue to face challenges which have been exacerbated by this recent pandemic. For instance, transporting alcohol between tasting room locations or breweries and wineries must sometimes be handled by a distributor, which increases the cost of the vintners and brewers. And retail selling of products can hamper businesses wanting to expand throughout this great state of Nevada. Members, I have distributed a copy of an amendment that we're introducing at this time. You should all have received the written copy, and it should be up on Nellis if it's not, but you should hopefully have all in your office. And at this time, Madam Chair, I'm going to turn the hearing over, or the presentation over, to co-presenter Tim Burke, who will go over the bill and its amendment. And I will be here to answer any further questions. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Dr. Titus, and welcome, Mr. Burke, when you're ready.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. For the record, I am Tim Burke, a resident and businessman from Pahrump. I've been a resident of Nevada for nearly 60 years. I grew up in the small rural community of Dayton near Carson City. My passion for the wine industry began in the early 1980s after visiting Napa, California. I was able to pursue my passion beginning in 2009 when I started attending classes at UC Davis. I have since gone on to earn a certificate in viticulture. I've used that knowledge to help vineyard owners in Nevada with their vines. And there I am. I am the winemaker and co-owner of Artesian Cellars in Pahrump. I would now like to provide a brief overview of AB 375, which addressed some of the concerns Assemblywoman Titus mentioned. Sections 1 and 2 of the bill authorizes a craft or estate distillery to operate as an alternating proprietorship with a licensed winery. Similar, Section 3 allows a winery to operate as an alternating proprietorship with a licensed craft or estate distillery. In 2017, it was authorized as an alternating proprietorship model so that separate winery companies can operate in one building. This would allow a similar model for an estate craft or distillery and a winery to do the same thing. Technically, once we looked at the language, it would be an alternating premise, not a proprietorship. This section of the bill is addressed by the friendly amendment. Sections 3 and 4 of the bill also allow a winery to import wine or juice from any bonded or permitted winery, transport wine between 2 or more bonded, permitted, and licensed wineries, and store wine at a federally bonded storage facility. As a winery grows, it accumulates vintages that need to be stored. Wines, especially red wines, often take several years to mature in a bottle before they are ready for sale to the consumer. Wines also should be stored at a much cooler temperature, typically 55 to 65 degrees. Those temperatures are difficult to maintain in a winery that is open to the public, where room temperatures are more commonly between 70 and 75 degrees. A separate bonded storage facility can properly store the wine and free up valuable space in a winery. Upon passage and approval of AB 375, and until September 30th, 2025, wineries may produce, bottle, blend, or age wine on the premises at a federally and permitted non-contiguous location or a licensed custom crush facility. Beginning October 1st, 2025, the location at which a winery may produce, bottle, blend, or age wine will no longer be restricted. For example, because of the restrictions implemented by COVID-19 pandemic, many wineries have had added restaurants and related equipment to their wineries so their tasting rooms could be open. In many instances, a winery's production space was converted to a restaurant and dining area. Also, because of social distancing requirements, production areas have been used to maintain social distancing for customers, eliminating that space from production. A non-contiguous production area would allow wineries to continue to use the converted production space as a restaurant and maintain social distancing. It would also allow us to maintain those additional tax revenues and keep those restaurant employees working. Under AB 375, wineries licensed after October 1st, 2015, will be allowed to serve by the glass on premise any alcohol beverage until September 30th, 2025. After October 1st, 2025, those wineries will not be restricted to selling wine produced, blend, or aged by the winery and may sell other alcoholic beverages. Finally, AB 375 increases the amount of wine and other alcoholic beverages that may be sold at retail or served by the glass by a winery producing, blending, or aging less than 25% of its wine from fruit grown in the state to no more than 2,000 cases in a calendar year. There is a friendly amendment to the bill. Section 3 adds that a winery must be licensed by the state of Nevada and defines custom crush. Additionally, we restore language to allow a winery to import from outside of the state and requires the same percentage, 25% or more, of honey that must be produced in the state as other wines. That particular section regarding honey is important to our mead and cider operations that operate as wineries because they do not use grapes, they use honey to produce their product. Section 4 adds conforming language. Conclusion. Thank you, Madam Chair. These revisions to the existing laws will enable businesses to grow throughout the state. I'm available now to answer any questions you may have.
Madam Chair, that is our presentation. We're happy to take questions.
Okay, members, any questions?
Yes, Madam Chair. If no one else is I was going to wait, but I can go ahead and start.
Yes, we'll start with you, Vice Chair Carlton, and then we will head to Assemblymember Flores next.
Okay, good. Thank you. So I had concerns about the custom crush, but I see that it's defined in the amendment. So and if I'm reading this correctly, this would be strictly Nevada grapes. They would not be bringing in grapes or juice from outside the state. Is that correct?
Mr. Burke?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so that eliminates one of the issues that I saw in the bill. I'm just trying to understand what is the problem you're actually trying to fix. I mean, I sat through this in 2015. It was a very long 4-hour hearing. Former Assemblyman Crescent Hardy did a great job in working on this bill, and so did Assemblyman Oscarson. There was an issue that they were really trying to fix. And it seems every session now we're coming back to get a little bit more and a little bit more. And that was one of the original concerns that we had in 2015, that this was going to grow into something that was beyond a winery or distillery actually doing the samples on site, being able to let people taste it on site. And now I see that they want to serve full alcohol. Basically, you want to turn these wineries into a bar. And I think Nevada has a lot of bars. So I guess I really want to understand, what is the issue you're really trying to fix here? It seems as though you're trying to get out of the winery, distillery, boutique niche that we sort of set up for you and become full-fledged bars.
Mr. Burke, I'll start if I might. Madam Vice Chair, thank you for that question. I gave a little oversight for the main things that this bill does. As you know, over sessions, we see what a bill does, and then we come back frequently to add to it or fix it. We've spent a lot of that time over the years adjusting things in our bills once we have experience with it. One of the first things is it adds mead to it, which we didn't identify in the past, which is certainly a custom drink, and mead by definition is when you use a honey. So that's one. Number two, as Mr. Burke pointed out, especially as you age these wines that you are making here in Nevada, that it may take several years, and with a limited number of cases of wine that you may have on your facility, it really limits the type of product that you might have, because as you're aging the great reds that you may have, and you take several years to age them, you're limited producing any of the other ones that maybe only require a year in the case. Or the keg or whatever. So you're limiting on what you can produce and how long you can have them. The other thing is the flexibility of transport between their units, and he described that briefly in his testimony. The final thing, as far as allowing any you're not allowed to sell that product if you're at the tasting room. There may be folks that would prefer some other the boutique beers or something else, and they allow them to serve them by the glass. Would be appropriate to again, it's an enterprise and it's a business, and certainly we have to be flexible with that. And with that, Mr. Burke, do you have anything else to add to Vice Chair Carlton's comments or questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you so much. It's an evolving industry. We have very few wineries in Nevada. We have the fewest in the entire West, one of the fewest numbers of wineries in the nation, for that matter. As we have grown, as wineries come on, we identify certain areas that are not major changes, but are small changes that will allow us to improve our business model, be profitable. None of us are big corporations. We are businesses that are, individuals that have mortgaged our homes to get these businesses going. So revenue is important. Winery equipment is very expensive. So some additional revenue streams are always helpful for us. Occasionally we do a special event, whether it's a meeting or something. We find it hard to believe, but not everybody wants to drink wine all the time. Maybe they want a glass of beer or something like that. And that's really the reason for that. We still want to be exactly that. Boutique wineries, building a Nevada industry. That is our goal, the wineries that are in favor of this.
And if I may, Madam Chair, I just want to make sure that I understand this correctly. So we've always had a delineation. I mean, it's a 3-tier system, and it's that way for a reason. And we've always made sure that the licensing went along with the actual function. And in reading this, I believe the wineries also want to be a distillery, but they only want to have one license. They don't want to be licensed as a winery and then licensed as a distillery. They just want to have one license. And I was just wondering, it seems to be contradictory to how our regulatory system works for enforcement and accountability. The lines are getting a little blurred here. And I just have, I have some concerns about that. We've done it that way for a reason. So maybe my next set of questions would probably be for tax rather than for the proponents of the bill to make sure that we can address this. It just seems like, when we did it the first time, it was very limited, and now it's getting a little bit bigger than what I think the intent actually was, as far as a family-owned winery or family-owned distillery. It's almost turning into a big business, and I think we need to keep that in the backs of our minds as we move forward. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carlton. Next, we'll go to Assemblymember Flores.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Assemblywoman and Mr. Burke, for your presentation. I'm looking at Section 3, page 6, line 43, in the strikeout of the 1,000 cases to the 2,000 cases. If you could just let us know how many people are in that space now that are doing the 1,000 cases, and what are, if we go to the 2,000 cases, how many folk will be participating in that? Do they have the capability of doing that? I'm just trying to understand what that means practically through a business lens, and who's participating in that and who's going to take advantage of it.
Mr. Burke,
I can answer that. Yes.
We also have industry on the line if needed, but Mr. Burke?
Yes. So, for example, in Northern Nevada, there's about 15,000 vines in the ground. It takes a good 4 years before those vines are planted, before they're able to produce any grapes that are commercially viable. A good 50% of those vines have been put in the ground after 2015. More vines are going in the ground. I know here in Pahrump, there's another 3,500 vines being planted this year. But again, we're 4 years out or so before those vines are actually producing grapes that we can use for Nevada grapes. Several of the wineries are bumping up against that cap now. They are actively harvesting Nevada grapes. I'm sure we're all aware of the frost that took place in June last year in northern Nevada. So those, every single grape and certain vineyards up there, including one with over 6,500 vines, were lost. So that fruit wasn't available. So without that fruit available, there's very little that can be done from a winery standpoint. We can't pull that fruit from anywhere else, have it be a Nevada grape. And so increasing the cap, and we're very cognizant of the 3-tier system and working within that system. Going to 2,000, a couple of wineries will probably be on projection for that in this coming year. It's difficult to tell because of COVID, which skews all of our numbers right now. But, and then hopefully grapes will become available and we won't have a late frost in June, which will allow some of those Nevada wineries to be able to harvest those Nevada grapes.
Madam Chair, if I could just clarify.
Yes, Assemblymember Flores, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Mr. Burke, for that. So just to make sure that I took that correctly, right now we think that there's maybe a couple of wineries that could potentially utilize a 2,000 case number should we go to that. And then even that, it's not, we're not 100% sure on that because we obviously have the concern that the season, temperature, X, Y, and Z will play into a factor. So even if we move up to the 2,000, we may not see that actually being maximized and used until many years down the road. Is that correct?
Oh, we don't know. It's very difficult to predict. Both the wine, it does start as an agricultural product, and that's one of the hardest things about this industry is that we are subject to Mother Nature quite often on our harvest. We also don't know post-COVID what our sales are going to be and how the public's going to respond in terms of returning back to wineries. We are of course hoping that we are pushing up those limits because that means more jobs for this industry and more jobs in the state and more tax revenue for the state. And those are all things that we want to have happen.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Assemblymember Flores. And I'm going to just jump in really quick because I do have a question. And Mr. Burke, if you would do me a favor and just identify yourself for the record when you're answering questions, it just helps with our committee secretary as she's taking the minutes. I've been on this committee since I've been at the legislature, and I recall these bills coming forth every session. And so I just have a quick question. You're asking to increase to 2,000 cases. Did we increase that last session as well? Or is this, I mean, has it always been 1,000 cases, or was that an increase and now this is another increase?
For the record, Tim Burke. No, that's always been the number.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Burke. I'm going to go to Assemblymember Considine next.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation, and thank you for answering these questions. I'm just looking at sort of parity and whether opening up for wineries to serve any alcoholic beverage then also means that allows craft breweries to open up and serve any alcoholic beverage by the glass. Is that kind of where this is going?
You could ask, thank you, Assemblywoman Titus here. You can ask legal on that, but the way this is under this statute, under the wineries, and I do not know that if it would also pertain to craft breweries. Mr. Burke?
Tim Burke for the record. Actually, I would have to go back and look, but I do know, I'm not sure if it's distilleries or breweries or both, they actually are allowed to sell wine now.
Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblymember, for your question. Assemblymember Tolles.
I thank you so much, Chair, for the indulgence to ask a question. First of all, I I'll just say for the record, I love mead. I was introduced to it in the past year, and we have a location in Reno that I think I would imagine would be really excited about this legislation. And one of the challenges is if we were to go out with another couple, I know that 3 of us like mead, but one of them doesn't, and they just want to be able to order a beer. So I think that they really appreciate that. That'll make when we're back out in the open again more, that'll make date nights fun. So my question though in regards to this is, it allows to be able to serve any alcoholic beverage. Is there any other requirements around food that are attached to this, or is that totally separate? All we're doing here is just allowing them to be able to add, in that case that I just laid out, you're an establishment that serves mead and you're now allowed to serve draft beer for anyone in the group that didn't want to have that mead.
Again, legal can clarify, but it doesn't affect any of the other statutes. This is just revolves around serving of the alcohol. And again, it's by the glass, not for sale, except by the glass.
I don't know if legal had an addition to that, or
Mr. Quast, looks like you unmuted yourself. Okay.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sam Quast, Committee Counsel. There's no requirements for food set forth in the section which this would affect. So to answer your question, no, there's no requirement for food.
okay, great. Just want to make sure. Thank you.
Okay, we will then go to Assemblymember Hardy.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to ask question. So I just wanted to talk a little bit, Section 5, and you kind of briefly touched on this. There's different effective dates, or when they become effective or when they expire. So could you maybe just tell me why they're different, how you arrived at those dates?
Mr. Burke, I'll have you give the history on that. You mentioned it briefly in your testimony. If you clarify, I'd appreciate it.
Yes, back in 2000, Tim Burke for the record. In 2015, when the NRS was changed to allow the wineries in tasting rooms in Clark County and Washoe County, there were wineries that were grandfathered prior to any winery license prior to 2015. I believe it was September 30th. It had the ability to sell wine by the glass, or other alcohols by the glass, to have an additional tasting room. There was no cap requirement on those wineries that were already previously in business prior to the change in statute in 2015. Post change in statute, the 1,000 case limit came into effect along with the other items. And the grandfather clause, though, has a 10-year date on it, which ends in 2025. And that's where all those dates are being pulled from.
Okay, thank you. So someone that has very limited knowledge about wine in general. So this is a really good learning experience for me. Could you tell me the difference between a craft distillery, an estate distillery, and a winery?
Tim Burke. Yes. Well, there is no formal designation within the state for an estate winery. An estate distillery means that you are in control of the grains that you use. So therefore you can have the estate designation on that. I'm not actually sure what the craft distillery definition is. But for wineries, it's a fairly broad and generic term. And in an ideal situation, there's 3 components to wineries. There's vineyards, there's the wine production, and then there's the winery tasting room. In an ideal environment, a winery is all 3. But often it's not practical. I mean, there are private vineyards in the state of Nevada that we harvest. There's separate wine production facilities, not here in the state, but in other states. And then there are the wine tasting rooms. So that all of those components eventually come together as a winery.
Okay, thank you. And I just realized, Madam Chair, I didn't ask for follow-up, so thank you.
You're welcome, Assemblymember Hardy. We have Assemblymember Kasama next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, presenters. I do have to reiterate, I have a girlfriend that loves to go to wineries and cannot get her husband to go with her because he will only drink vodka. And so she might be able to get him to go now. And I don't think we'll see people flocking to wineries that like to drink spirits, but I think it'll accommodate those that do show up with the rest of us that like wine. My question is just a general broad one. You made a statement, it's just from my personal understanding, where you said, as a state, we're the lowest wine producer in the United States. And my question is, has that been due to regulatory issues, or is that more geographic or climate issues? Just curious.
Well, Tim Burke for the record. And I don't know that we're the lowest, but we're one of the lowest. We're certainly the lowest on the Western United States in terms of wineries. Utah has more wineries than we do. But it's probably a combination, but one of the biggest drawbacks has been the fact that a great deal of our state of Nevada, as we all know, belongs to BLM or is controlled by BLM. There aren't that many great agricultural producing areas within the state. Wine grapes, and the University of Nevada did a study on this. Wine grapes are actually a better agricultural product in terms of use of water than alfalfa. But again, it's a generational type of product. So when people talk about hemp or they talk about marijuana, they're looking for a quick turn. You plant put a vine in the ground, it takes several years. So it takes a long time to develop that infrastructure. First, to convince people to put vines in the ground, and then for the vines themselves to mature. And there's not a lot of knowledge here either. We're all learning as we go. There's not a good playbook for Nevada's for wineries to start up in Nevada. So it's a slow process. We kind of feel like we're pioneers in getting this off the ground, starting with Jack Sanders originally almost 30 years ago.
Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Okay. Did I see a show of hands? Anyone? Oh, Assemblymember Duran, there you are.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for the presentation, and I understand that we need to make our winery businesses a little more profitable. But my concern is, as follow-up with Vice Chair Carlton and VC, or Assemblywoman, oh my God, I forgot her name. I'm sorry. Anyway, so my question is, where are you going to get this alcohol, and is it going to be limited to certain drinks? Because again, it says served by the glass on its premise, any alcoholic beverage. So, I mean, are you opening up to where you're going to have mixed drinks, or is it just going to be some brandy or some other type of drink, or do you have to have a license or a port card to mix these drinks?
Tim Burke for the record. Well, we're not sure what other wineries may want to do in terms of mixed drinks. Any alcohol that we would receive into our wineries would be through the three-tiered system and through our distributors. We're again, it's never going to be a winery's main part of their business. It just gives them an additional option. They would have to have whatever local liquor licenses are required in order to pour any alcohol of any type. So they would have to follow certainly their local regulations first.
Follow-up, Chair?
Yes, please, Assemblywoman Duran.
So, and just because being in the business, you do have to take your TAM cards and your alcohol awareness cards and all the other classes to serve alcohol, as well as, you know, just safe serve classes and stuff like that. Are these places going to follow those regulations as well?
Tim Burke, for the record. It's a county to county requirement. Yes, but most counties absolutely require that any member, for example, here in Nye County, anyone that pours must go through and acquire a sheriff's card and have a background check done prior to doing that. I know in Clark County, you have to go through a class on alcohol awareness, but it does vary from county to county.
Thank you.
Okay, and I do have a couple of questions as well. And I think I know the answer to this, but I do want to ask just to clarify on the record. The language where it says that a winery can transport wine between two or more wineries which have been issued a winemaker's license. Is that in any way stepping on this in the lanes of distributors?
Tim Burke, for the record. We don't think so. We are in the, there's no tax involved, and any bond-to-bond transfer must be, that paperwork has to be done and submitted to the TTB, and it's part of our records that we submit to taxation every month. So there is a trail for that.
But would this be, is this a function of like an alcohol distributor? Is this something that they do, transport wine between two or more wineries? Is that something that you would normally hire a distributor to do?
No, actually, it can be, currently it can be any trucking company that's licensed to transport alcohol. It doesn't have to be a distributor.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Burke. And then my last question. So I was reading that there's quite a bit of different criteria for wine that's made from 25% of grapes grown in the state, or more than 25% of the grapes grown in the state, or less than 25% of the grapes grown in the state. And you talked about creating jobs, and how about this being, a bill that could potentially create jobs here in our state. Now, how many cases, if wine is produced and 25% or more of the wine is produced from grapes grown in the state, how many cases are you limited to?
Well, we're currently limited to 1,000 cases, no matter where the grapes are pulled in from. If that was increased to 2,000, and we were able to harvest enough Nevada grapes to have 25%, for example, if we got enough Nevada grapes to do another 250 cases, that would give us the ability to essentially be a 3,000 case winery. And 3,000 cases is sort of the benchmark of where wineries like to be to eventually be profitable.
Okay, and that leads me to my next question. So you just said that, so if I'm reading it, the language says if 25% or more of the wine produced, blended or aged from fruit grown in the state, that is limited to 1,000 cases, as is wine. If less than 25% of the wine produced is also limited to 1,000 cases. So you're only seeking to increase the number of cases sold for wine that's made with more grapes brought in from out of state. Why aren't we doing the reverse? Why aren't we increasing the number of cases sold for grapes that are grown in the state versus grapes that are grown out of the state? Because the more grapes we can produce in the state, the more jobs that would be created. But I don't see us increasing the number of cases that you're allowed to sell for grapes grown in the state. We're only increasing it for the grapes grown out of the state.
Tim Burke. So the goal, frankly, I think the goal for every winery in the state is to be at 100% Nevada grapes. There are not enough grapes to do that. So why vineyards are being planted, why the vineyards are being matured, allowing wineries to increase their numbers and bring in grapes that they have to source because there simply aren't enough Nevada grapes to do that right now, allows us to have capital to put in vineyards. To put in a vineyard is a $25,000 and $50,000 endeavor per acre. And based on current numbers, plus pay staff, plus have a building open, plus do everything else, the financials don't work out very well in our favor to keep building this business.
Thank you, Mr. Burke, and I appreciate that. I just think we have to find a mechanism in here or build a mechanism in here that would encourage people to want to plant and grow Nevada grapes, because if we leave it at 1,000 and we increase the cases that you could produce and sell for out-of-state grapes, and they're only going to be encouraged to buy out-of-state grapes. Like you said, you know, there's a lot of expenses paying staff and stuff, but that's ultimately we want them to get. We want where we want to get them, right? I mean, I completely agree with you. We want to be 100% Nevada grapes. That would be wonderful. I think we have to have a mechanism built in that would encourage people to go that route. You know, maybe allowing them to produce more cases if they are more than 25%, you know, Nevada grapes grow, and then there's an incentive there to want to plant more grapes in the state.
Madam Chair, can I add to that?
Yes, absolutely, Mr. Burke.
So there's a mechanism in California where they actually give incentives to vineyards through tax incentives and those types of things to encourage the agricultural production of grapevines. And that's something that we don't have in place here in the state, but there's really nothing in the state that encourages vineyard owners themselves. They may not want to make wine, they may not want to be wineries, but they want to produce grapes to sell those grapes to Nevada wineries. So other states do have mechanisms in place to encourage exactly what you're stating.
Thank you, Mr. Burke. I appreciate that. If you have that, if that's information you could share, that would be great.
I do.
Thank you. Members, any other questions? Okay, last call. Okay, seeing no hands raised, I am going to move into testimony and support. If we could, broadcasting, check the telephone line for anyone wishing to testify in support of the bill, please.
Yes, Chair. To testify in support on AB 375, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you would like to testify in support on AB 375, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 012, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Hi, this is Valdine McLean. I'm from Cruise Road Winery out in Lovelock, Nevada, and I support this bill. I support the increase of the case amount for many of the reasons that Tim Burke has stated. But one and foremost, it does give us the ability to weather the situations where when we do have a late frost and it destroys our crops, we still have inventory or the ability to produce and save and keep going for the following year. I, though, am not even near 1,000 cases. We've just started up. So I'm just looking at future aspects of it. And then the other thing that was of real interest is also the ability to serve, like they said, like for us, a typical beer. You know, we get a lot of people out that have the wine, but they don't bring a friend or a spouse or partner, and they would just like a Coors Light. So it's not something that I want a bar scene at all. That's absolutely not what I'm into. But it is nice to be able to offer someone something more than a glass of water while their friend sips wine. And that's all I have to contribute to this. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Thank you. Broadcasting, can we move to those wishing to testify in opposition?
Yes, Chair, to testify in opposition on AB 375, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 057, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last three digits of 057, you are unmuted, but we cannot hear you. Do you happen to be, is your phone on mute?
Oh, there we go. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Yes, we can.
Great. Thank you. Thank you for the opportunity to speak today. My name's Adam Hands. I'm with Great Basin Winery in Reno. I like Tim. I grew up in Carson City. I'm a graduate of UNR, professor at UNR today, and have served our state as a member of the Public Works Board since 2016. My concern with the bill, and there's a lot good in it that's been discussed already, is the requirement to have 25% Nevada-grown fruit with to increase the production limit in northern Nevada. The issue is the lack of fruit in northern Nevada, and the climate's been brought up. And I would love to be able to purchase all the fruit. I'm one of the wineries that's pushing the limit right now, by the way. And I would love to be able to purchase fruit near Reno to satisfy the requirement. You know, there are about 20 vineyards around town. Tim mentioned the number of vines. That would produce about 3,000 cases, and that would need to be spread around probably about 6 or 7 vineyards or wineries in northern Nevada. He also mentioned the frost that killed all the fruit at most of the vineyards in northern Nevada this year. So we have a challenge not only with the climate and the availability of fruit, but the challenge with the ability to grow our businesses. Brew pubs and craft distilleries don't have any restrictions on the use of Nevada-grown agricultural products. Basically, a brewery can produce 40,000 barrels a year with a value of about $16 million, and craft distilleries can produce 10,000 cases at a value of about $3 million a year. Again, that's just using publicly available sale prices and current limits. Wineries at less than 1,000 cases or 1,000 cases or less have a value of about annual value of about $300,000, which is very difficult to run a business on. It's less than 2% of the value of the beer breweries can produce, and less than about 1% of the value of the spirits that distillers can produce. So even with the proposed increase to 2,000 cases, wineries would be, again, well below even 5% of what the other alcohol producers can produce. And so the question I pose is it unreasonable for wineries to be able to produce, 5 or 10%, even 5 or 10% of what breweries and craft distilleries can produce? And I think this addresses a couple of the questions that came up by the committee members during the discussion this far, and I'd be happy to answer any questions. Thank you.
Thank you. We appreciate your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
If you recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition on AB 375, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you so much, Broadcasting. Let's move into those wishing to testify in the neutral position. Before we go to the telephone line, Broadcasting, I do know that we had one of our presenters on another bill here to testify in the neutral position on AB 375, and he's on video. So I would like to first go to Mr. Alfredo Alonso in the neutral position.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Members of the committee, Alfredo Alonso with the law firm of Lewis Roca, today on behalf of Southern Glazer Wine and Spirits and the Nevada Beer Wholesalers Association. And just so I can clarify why we are where we are today, when the bill that passed, I believe it was 2015, at the time, we had newspaper articles all over the place talking about growing grapes. It was about turning Nevada into Eastern Washington, and that somehow the system was keeping these folks out, which was not the case. The only difference at the time was that there was a bill that had been passed 10 years earlier to allow for economic development in the rural counties. So that allowed for tasting rooms, and you could still have a winery in the other counties, you just couldn't have a tasting room. So this is all about the tasting room. So we've, years later, we've been trying to work with some of the folks that are before you today. I think Mr. Burke is obviously a fine person. He is trying to make a go in a very difficult and very competitive world. So I applaud him for that. Where we have concerns is, again, and you heard one individual discuss it, where it isn't about growing grapes. It isn't about creating a winery in the sense of what a winery is. It's about flooding the market with other people's grapes and other people's juice. And what's really important here is, again, I think the amendment covers most of our concerns, and that's why I'm in the neutral right now. The amendment basically makes it certain that we're talking about Nevada wineries using other Nevada wineries with respect to bringing grapes or juice or perhaps a finished product in. One of the concerns that was brought up was, hey, we want to buy grapes out of Amargosa Valley in southern Nevada, but we can't transport it because if we try to transport it, it'll go back. So we understand that. That makes perfect sense. So if they want to use a custom crush facility, i.e. another winery that's located in that area, I think that's perfectly reasonable. And I think that makes perfect sense in allowing them to get closer to that 25%. And it's important to note that at 25%, you don't have limitations. So the whole point was, and again, consistent with what the proponents had pushed and thought was important, 5 years ago, and that's to grow Nevada grapes, like you see in every winery and most wineries throughout the country. Arizona had some issues similar to this, where many of these wineries were coming into the state unfettered. They weren't Arizona wineries. They had no intention of growing Arizona grapes. And so they've had to curb that issue back. It's the integrity of the system. It's the integrity of the wineries. And what Tim and others are trying to do, I think, is absolutely the right thing. So what you've seen in the amendment that was proposed, I think, covers most of the concerns we had. Striking out the out-of-state crush facilities. Again, if you can buy California grapes and even have them crushed and bottled in California, then I'm not sure you're a Nevada winery anymore. I think you're a bar. And so I think that was an important piece of that. So we're supportive of their efforts to continue to grow more grapes. And I'd be glad to answer any questions. I think again, what Tim and Bill Locken before him and others have been trying to do is, I think it's amazing, and I hope they have the best of luck and make a lot of wine in the years to come.
And I do have a question for you, Mr. Alonso. Did you say they were? So I thought in the bill presentation, and when I had asked about if you're using more, if your wine that you produce is made up of more than 25% of Nevada grown grapes, then you're unlimited with the number of cases you could produce?
That's correct. That's how we've always read it. That's how the bill was first presented and passed in 2015. It's also really important to note that 3/4 of the wineries, more than 3/4 of the wineries in this country, are under 5,000 cases. So we're talking about the vast majority of wineries are closer to the 1,000 to 2,000 cases, the limits that we're even talking about them bringing in grapes. So the idea that this is a small amount is just simply nonsensical. The thing we're trying to avoid is, again, a large winery, a large producer. And we've had these issues before with rectifiers in the statute that this body has had to come back and define. And that is someone that brings in pre-fermented or fermented juice, bottled, and then you call it a Nevada winery or a Nevada anything for that matter. I think you have to be really careful with that. We're very limited in our resources at the Department of Taxation. Our enforcement, I mean, they do the best they can under the circumstances, but we're limited. And because of that, it is very difficult to know whether taxes are being paid, especially when you're basically shipping in product from another state. So I think what the minority leader's trying to do here with the amendment and overall, I think helps the industry without going too far.
Thank you, Mr. Alonso, and I like your flag in the background. Thank you. Broadcasting, is there anyone else on video that would like to testify in the neutral position? Okay, broadcasting, can we check the telephone line?
Yes, Chair. To testify in neutral on AB 375, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 505, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 505, please press star 6 to unmute. Again, caller with the last, oh, you are unmuted, caller 505.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
My name is Carrie Bath. I've been involved in the wine industry for the last 10 years in Nevada. I am also on the board of Western Nevada Development District. I would like to say that I am in favor of this bill for an economic development reason, just to diversify our economy in Nevada and increase our tax base and our job core.
Thank you, ma'am. I'm sorry, we were taking testimony in the neutral position. We will make sure to record yours in support, but could we get your name one more time, please? And could you spell it for our committee secretary?
Terry, T-E-R-I, last name Bath, B-A-T-H.
Thank you. Broadcasting, can we check to see if there's anyone else on the line to testify in the neutral position?
Yes, Chair. Again, to testify in neutral on AB 375, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Dr. Titus, would you like to give any closing remarks?
Yes, I would. Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for your great questions. I would just like to point out, and for clarity, that as Mr. Alonso said, just for your question, Madam Chair, is that they can produce unlimited number of cases now if it's Nevada grapes. So what this purpose of putting that ceiling on there is, as he addressed, we didn't want wineries coming in, people just, California companies coming to Nevada. We really want to promote Nevada businesses. Also, again, we do want to promote Nevada businesses. So the reality is that we should be supportive of whatever we can do to help true Nevada businesses grow, and not only what has always been a relatively difficult world, but even more so in current economic standards. So thank you all for your great questions. Hope to share a glass of wine with all of you at some point in time. And thank you very much for hearing this bill.
Thank you, Dr. Titus. Okay, with that, we will close the hearing on Assembly Bill 375. Next bill on our agenda is Assembly Bill 391. I will now open the hearing on Assembly Bill 391, and I believe we have Assembly Member Anderson here to present the bill. Welcome to the Committee on Commerce and Labor. When you're ready, Assembly Member Anderson, you can begin.
Thank you, and good afternoon, Chair Hergy, Vice Chair Carlton, and members of the Commerce and Labor Committee. My name is Natha Anderson, and it is my honor to represent Assembly District 30. AB 391 includes very extensive cleanup language that's coming from the Nevada Board of Dispensing Opticians. The goal over the last year, they've been trying to look over the language of NRS Chapter 637 to make sure that the language both reflects current practices, best practices, and then also take away some of the more cumbersome areas that's a little bit confusing for people. And so this bill is being brought forward to try to present that. At the same time, let's be realistic. It's a very extensive bill. I think it's 37 pages. And so Ms. Laxalt, the lobbyist for the Nevada Board of Dispensing Opticians, has actually done a 9-page kind of chart that clarifies where all those changes are. And that should be on Nellis for those people that are following along. Due to the nature of the very technical language, with your permission, Chair Harrigy, I'd like to actually hand it over to Corinne Cedrin, who's the Executive Director of the Nevada Board of Dispensing Opticians, and Nina Laxalt, who is their lobbyist this session. Would that be acceptable, Chair?
Yes, Ms. Anderson.
Thank you so much. So Ms. Cedrin and Ms. Laxalt, it's on to you.
I will go ahead and start. Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. I appreciate it, and I appreciate your agreeing to sponsor this bill for us for your freshman year. Madam Chair, members of the committee, for the record, my name is Nina Laxalt, today representing the Dispensing Opticians Board. And as the sponsor had said, the board has been going through their regulations and trying to clean them up and update them. And as they were doing that, of course, they discovered that they were going to need some changes and clean up with their statutes as well. So this is, in fact, a full statute cleanup. It's taking some of the outdated areas. It's combining areas that were either repetitive or confusing. And so they're hoping that this bill that's presented to you will make it a lot easier for applicants to understand the law and the licensing process. And with that, I will go through the provisions of the bill itself. And I basically clip and pasted this off of the digest, so I apologize for that. But I did, with Corinne, provide a beautiful chart in a spreadsheet that will help you also understand each section by section. But the bill authorizes the dispensing opticians to employ an executive director. It provides immunity from civil liability to the board and any of its members, staff, and employees for certain acts, consistent with many statutes, by the way, with other boards. It expands the purposes for which the board is authorized to accept gifts, grants, donations, and contributions. It requires the board to perform certain duties relating to insurance, renewal, reinstatement, revocation, and suspension of licenses. It prescribes requirements for the submission of the application for licensure. It requires the board to adopt certain regulations relating to licensure. It prescribes criteria for eligibility for a license as an apprentice dispensing optician, clarifies certain requirements relating to eligibility for a limited license as a dispensing optician, revises criteria for eligibility for a license as a dispensing optician, removes the authority of the board to issue a special license as a dispensing optician, reorganizes certain provisions, and increases the amount of the administrative fine for engaging in certain activity without holding a license. And with that said, I do want to say that we will have to submit an amendment to Section 24, as there was some language that was omitted in the drafting. And if you look at the bill, Section 24, Section 3, I believe, at the very bottom, and it's talking about accepting gifts, grants, and those sections, of course, were deleted, but it has administer oaths and issues subpoenas to compel the attendance of a witness and the production of books and papers. And simply, we needed to have added documents in any other article related to the practice of I cannot say the word ophthalmic. Anyway, those were just a few words that were missing. Again, the same words that are in other boards' language. And So that's sort of a quick summary on what the bill is doing. And I have Corinne Sedrum here, who is the Executive Director for the Dispensing Opticians, and she's going to somewhat follow the spreadsheet that was provided not only to all of you in an email last Friday, as well as this presentation, but is also on the exhibits for today. So she can go through and give you section by section or combined sections by sections, and then be able to answer any questions that you might have following. I appreciate your time and hope you consider support.
Thank you, Ms. Laxalt. Ms. Sedrin?
Right, thank you. Hello, Madam Chair and members of the committee. My name is Corinne Sedrin. I'm the Executive Director for the Board of Dispensing Opticians. I apologize in advance for the terrible video quality. I obviously need a Zoom light, but I'm just going to do the best I can for today with the setup that we have. So, yeah, as Nina already alluded to, this bill is meant to clean up the bill that, or I'm sorry, our current statute, which is outdated. It's very clunky, and it's just not very easy to navigate for people who are not. It's not even easy to navigate for someone like me who deals with it on a daily basis. And I know Assemblywoman Anderson did allude to the fact that, you know, the bill is very, very long. Part of the reason for that is that our statute is incredibly long and cumbersome. And so, you know, our main purpose here is to not only update, but consolidate it, make it clear and comprehensible to anybody that's going to try to navigate our bill and figure out the laws pertaining to ophthalmic dispensing. For anybody who doesn't know, ophthalmic dispensers in Nevada dispense prescription ophthalmic products such as contact lenses and spectacles. So we license everyone in Nevada other than optometrists and ophthalmologists who are dispensing these products to the public. I'll just go through as quickly as I can each individual provision, and if there's questions on the reasoning behind any of them, I can answer those. The first change we made was changing the short title of the chapter. It just was an unnecessary provision. We never allude to the short title of the chapter. We always just refer to it as NRS Chapter 637. We did add a declaration of purpose here in line with other boards' bills to just clarify what the board's purpose is in regulating this profession. We did do some definitional updates. Specifically, this term ophthalmic dispensing needed to be updated to reflect current practices. Specifically, we wanted to remove this word design from the definition, I'm sorry, not design, delivery from the definition of ophthalmic dispensing to reflect the reality that a lot of this dispensing is happening online now. Online purveyors are actually delivering the products to the consumers, as well as, you know, in a retail setting, you often have somebody who may not be licensed, but who is actually just handing the product over to the customer. We wanted to clarify, though, that we do need to have a physical final inspection done to these products by somebody who's licensed before they are handed over to the consumer. So again, we're just updating that definition to reflect that. The next section, I believe that covers pretty much everything under this first section of the board's bills, which has to do with, you know, general provisions. I'm going to move on to Board of Dispensing Opticians. That's the next section heading in our law. We made some changes to not the functionality of the board, but just the language to reflect the functionality of the board. We added a provision allowing the governor to appoint a person to fulfill the current term if a member leaves or resigns from the board. We have had that situation before where we have an opening and we just need the governor to fill it. We have consolidated provisions pertaining to electing officers of the board, what constitutes a quorum, general functioning of the board in an office setting. This law does not reflect current practice, so it alludes to a secretary of the board. The board hasn't employed a secretary of the board, at least with that title, in many years. This new provision allows the board to hire an executive director and any other personnel as needed. It just clarifies we are able to contract with outside counsel, with outside, outside experts in other areas. It just clarifies the board's ability to do that. Again, clarifies a quorum, and it allows the governor to remove or replace a member of the board. We also clarified some sections relating to compensation for employees of the board and board members. Again, election of officers provisions, those have all been consolidated under a single section heading dealing with board officers. Because again, the statute language currently is just very clunky and it's disjointed, and we just wanted to streamline it as much as possible. There may be some questions about this immunity clause. Did follow verbatim language from the massage therapy board statute when putting this in place. This is pretty common in occupational licensing board statutes. Our reasoning here for this is our members of the board are licensed professionals. When it comes to ophthalmic dispensing, we're not legal professionals. We do the best we can, to perform our duties. But, when we're acting in good faith and without malicious intent, the idea is that we should have immunity when we're trying to carry out the duties of our jobs or of our board terms. Another provision that may have some questions, this gifts, grants, donations, that the board is able to now take gifts, grants, and donations to carry out the provisions of this chapter. This clause was originally under disciplinary actions. It allowed the board to accept gifts and donations to carry out investigations. It did not seem to make sense from the perspective that investigations are supposed to be confidential until the board takes disciplinary action. It seemed to mean in that context that the board could take a donation from somebody who's filing a complaint to carry out the investigation. It doesn't make sense from a public records perspective. Any donations to the board, any income would need to be public, but yet the complaint is supposed to be confidential. So to have that provision under the complaint section did not make sense. We've moved it here. As far as I know, we have never accepted donations to fulfill the provisions of this chapter. I'm not aware of accepting any gifts or donations. We are a very small board and we operate on a very tight budget. So my thinking is on this provision, if we are ever in a tight spot, like we had this past year where we may not have been able to collect all the licensing fees or the renewal fees that we normally would on a regular year, that this would give the board the ability to continue functioning if we were to collect grants and donations for that purpose. We did add we consolidated some rulemaking provisions under a single section here. So the board now, under this provision, would have general rulemaking authority. We wanted to consolidate a lot of the more administrative practices of the board related to administering licenses, issuing renewal, checking on CE credits, inactivating and reactivating licenses. We wanted to move that off into the regulations so that we have more flexibility, again, in cases of unusual years like this past one that we have more flexibility to accommodate our licensees. And also, when this law was enacted, it was enacted with a standard expiration date on all licenses of January 31st. So some licenses are issued mid-year, some are issued in October or November, and then that license is only good through January 31st, even though that person's paid a full fee for licensure. So we wanted to have the ability to change those deadlines and those renewal dates as we need to. And that's a major reason for moving most of these administrative issues into the regulations, is to have more flexibility on those issues. We also wanted to consolidate some regulations pertaining to minimum standards of quality for lenses and for dispensing prescription products. We wanted to, again, clarify those things under the regulations. So just giving the board a general regulations provision here, and also just a general roles and responsibilities of the board here, consistent with other occupational licensing board statutes. Okay, and then we did remove, this is the last provision I want to speak to under the Board of Dispensing Opticians heading. And this is to deal with complaints. And what we really did here was move all of these complaint provisions under disciplinary and other actions at the end of the statute. So again, it's consolidated, it makes sense, and it's easy for people to find what they're looking for with respect to complaints and disciplinary action. Okay, I'll go ahead and move on to the licenses, which is the next subject heading in our statute. This was the one that we really wanted to focus on when changing our statute. This was the big one that was causing the most confusion for people, the most difficulty for us when we wanted to update our licensing requirements to reflect current practice. So this is one where we really made a lot of changes.
I'm so sorry, Corinne. I have no idea what page you're on because I'm trying to follow along and I don't feel like I'm doing a very good job of that. So could you tell me what page you're on? And by the way, this is Assemblymember Anderson. I'm trying to make sure I'm on the right page.
Okay, so are you looking at the chart that we submitted?
Yes.
Okay.
Or better yet, you can even give us the NRS number and the page number. That'd be a huge.
Oh. Okay, but just so I'm clear, you want the NRS and page number for the original statute or for the bill?
Yes. And don't forget also that was Corinne Cedrin. This is Assemblymember Anderson. Why don't you talk about the page number and the NRS section exactly that you're referring to, so that way we can follow along accurately.
Okay, but again, can I clarify, are you asking for the page number for the bill or for the original statute?
For the language that you're presenting, for the chart, please.
The graph right now, correct? Ms. Cedrin?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that?
Ms. Cedrin, I believe you're presenting the chart that you uploaded, that you provided us as an exhibit, correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I am going through the chart.
Okay, and which page number of the chart are you currently on? I think that's what Anderson was asking.
Yes, okay, I'm sorry. I am on page 4 of 7.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I apologize for not clarifying. So under on page 4, we're looking at NRS 637.100, and which would be section 20 of the bill, qualifications for examination and licensing as a dispensing optician. So the current practice is we are using a national exam to test proficiency, and so this provision is outdated. We do want to leave the board the ability to administer its own exam if it decides to do so in the future. But what we really want to do was streamline the requirements for licensure. And so what we did was we really took out a lot of the subheadings, a lot of the confusing, allusions to 100 contact lens hours, the certification of the ABO, things like that, just the specifics of it that really should be addressed in regulation rather than in statute. So also, we wanted to change the length of time an apprentice needed to apprentice, reduce it from 3 years to 2 years to allow people to become licensed quicker who are do test and show proficiency. So I think that pretty much covers what we've changed with that section. We also have we've added a provision regarding out-of-state applicants to clarify the waiver requirements and that the board can waive certain requirements listed under NRS 637.100. We want to make it very clear what the board can waive, what is still required, and we wanted to take out this provision related to special licenses, because that, for all intents and purposes, a special license is exactly the same as a standard ophthalmic dispensing license. Special license refers to somebody who's coming from out of state and they're just using a different application. They have different requirements, but the license is exactly the same. It's an optician's dispensing license. And so we did want to take out references to that special license and special license application and just consolidate all the provisions together governing the licensing requirements for opticians. I'm going to move on to section, again on page 4, NRS 637.110 and 115. These have been repealed. Again, these are just really particulars relating to licensing administration. We've consolidated a lot of these provisions under a new fee section. Again, the waiver requirements we've already adjusted after 637.100. So these sections are no longer necessary. I'm going to move on to page 5. All of these sections that are listed here as being repealed. Again, we're just streamlining the licensing requirements, taking out anything that's redundant, moving all of the deadlines and fees into the realm of the regulations. We are addressing apprentice licenses now under a new section, so they are in their own separate section, and it's clarified and streamlined. I'll go ahead and move down to the bottom of page 5, NRS 637.121, section 21 of the bill. So this is just to clarify, limited licenses are no longer being issued by the board. It's a license to only dispense spectacles as opposed to contact lenses, and the board is no longer issuing those licenses, only dual full licenses. So this is just relating to limited licenses, their ability to still hold that license. They've been grandfathered under these statutes, and so they can continue to hold that license, but if they let the license lapse, they won't be able to get a new limited license, and we are not issuing new limited licenses. I'll go ahead and move on to page 6. Again, under the licenses subheading, 637.125, we've really just streamlined again provisions related to the employment of ophthalmic dispensers and apprentice ophthalmic dispensers, clarified the supervision requirements, and just really clarified that you cannot practice without a license, and that if you are employing somebody who is practicing without a license, you're going to be culpable as well under our laws. That's already in the law. We just streamlined it. Section 10 of the BDR, this would be a new section. We've just consolidated and clarified our complaints provision, make it clear the board can act on complaints pertaining to unlicensed activity as well as this activity that would be subject to disciplinary action of a licensee. That's all contained now under a single section, and clarified as far as what is a public record versus what is confidential. Section 23, this is what is NRS 637.150. Provisions related to disciplinary actions have been streamlined. So we wanted to streamline unprofessional conduct. We also wanted to update the definition of unprofessional conduct. There were so many subheadings under this section. It was confusing and rambling, and we just wanted to streamline and consolidate and make it very clear. I don't think we've changed anything as far as substantively. I don't think we've changed much of the what would constitute an action that would require disciplinary action by the board, but we have clarified it. Section 24, this is related to investigations, again, streamlining the board's investigatory authority, general authority to conduct investigations. The provisions related to issuing subpoenas have been moved from up above under, they were initially under the general provisions, I believe. Actually, I think they were under Board of Opticians, and they've been moved here again to streamline and clarify everything related to disciplinary actions by the board. I'll go ahead and move on to page 7. These two sections, 637.155 and 0.170, have been repealed. And they've just been combined. These provisions have been combined with section 637.150, streamlining. 0.175 has also been repealed. This was a single provision under the miscellaneous provisions heading. It pertained to dispensing prescriptions, giving the length of time a prescription is valid. Again, we moved this under the word general rulemaking authority. That would be section 18, I believe. And we just put everything that the board might want to regulate pertaining to scope of practice and standards of practice under that one section pertaining to rulemaking authority. Finally get to the end here at 637.181, prohibited acts, penalties, and enforcement. both this section and .183 govern unlicensed activities. But this section, this first section, .181, deals with individuals. .183 deals with employers. So there was a fee change to .183 to match, I'm sorry, not a fee, a fine. The fine cap was changed in .183 in this draft to match that in .181. The reasoning being that often when there is an unlicensed individual dispensing, breaking the laws, it's often that the employer is more culpable in that than the individual. They're often directing that individual to dispense these products, either without a license or without adequate supervision as required by this statute. So that was our reasoning for increasing the fines against the employers to match what the fine is or what the fine cap is for the individuals. And that is everything that I have here. I know that was very lengthy, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
And also, I just wanted to clarify again, thank you, Chair, for allowing us this time to present. I know that there's a large amount of things, and we'll be continuing to work with the board to get that clarified. And so it's tough to try to get such technical information, but more than happy to answer any questions you may have. But again, just wanted to thank you for getting this scheduled so quickly with such in-depth information. I think we're ready for questions. If anybody would like to ask them.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. And thank you to your co-presenters as well. I do have questions. I'm going to start with our Vice Chair Carlton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, Assemblywoman Anderson. Tackling a board bill your first year out is a huge lift. They are very, very complicated and very difficult to explain, and especially in this environment when you can't have individual conversations with folks. And Madam Chair, if I ask a question that's already been answered, I apologize. I just realized there was a chart. It was sent on Friday late and I did not get it. So we were busy this morning. So I'm going through the chart right now, trying to figure out where all the pieces fit. But the one thing that I would kind of like to address is in section 6, they're talking about waiving requirements for licensure, and under sub 3 they has at least 5 years of work experience. That's something that I've worked with, and it's what we typically call our credentialing language, but it's just not work experience. It's a full look at the person. You want to make sure that 5 years of experience, there isn't something else that might have been going on if they were working in another state, and how that overlays with the other provisions. And I think it was, I'm flipping quickly, section 18, in licensure under section 18, the board being able to evaluate the applications. When you lay 18 on top of 6.3, how does that actually work? Because I love the way you started this. The legislature declares that the purpose of this chapter is to protect the public. Just because they have a solid license for 5 years doesn't mean there might not have been another issue in the last 5 years. So I'd like to understand how those two sections would work together, and does the board have the authority to deny a license, or will they have to accept someone from out of state, otherwise known as reciprocity, under section 6?
Okay. Oh, sorry, Nina, did you want to?
Oh no, after you, Corinne, Ms. Sedgren.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so to address your question, first of all, the language that was submitted to us by the LCB with respect to that 5-year requirement, that was not our initial language that we had proposed, and we're actually not crazy about it. What the language in the current statute says is if you are licensed in another state or U.S. territory, you can bypass our apprenticeship program. And if you are not licensed in another state or U.S. territory, you must have had 5 or more years experience in an unlicensed state or territory. So what we were trying to clarify here was that the experience can be from a state or a territory where they do have what they call like a certification or a limited license, something that does not that is not on par with what we issue, and their licensing requirements are not comparable to our licensing requirements. We wanted to accommodate those people by making it a 5-year requirement. However, as far as other requirements to verify that these people are competent to practice, we were going to address that with the national certifications and examinations that are required, first of all. But secondly, this language is that the board may waive these requirements. So we wanted to leave ourselves open for the board still to do a full review of all of these applications and just review and understand what the totality of this person's experience is, as you suggested, and determine based on that whether they're going to issue a license. But the point of the new language was to allow the board to issue licenses to someone who may not have a comparable license in another state or territory, but they do have plenty of work experience.
Okay, and I understand that because I'm cleaning, and I totally appreciate it. I'm cleaning up a bill of my own that'll end up going to another committee because apparently I wasn't clear enough on exactly what I wanted. So I've had to basically do a pretty full rewrite. And I'm pretty familiar with this 5-year language. We created it as credentialing when we did the original dental bill back in, gosh, I want to say 2003. And it's basically looking at a person over the last 5 years. It's not just work experience. It's looking at them in a totally holistic way to make sure, they may have great work experience, but there could be something else on their record that would make you want to take pause as far as protecting the public in this state. So I think you definitely want to address that. And if I could, Madam Chair, there was a section under 18 also, it is on page 10 at the top, establish standards of practice for persons licensed. Typically, we do scope of practice in statute, so everybody knows what their rules are as far as their scope of practice goes. Establishing those by regulation could cause issues with other practitioners that are in this general area. And we had a very contentious bill last session with optometrists, I believe it was. So I would just be apprehensive of scope of practice being defined in regulation and not actually put into statute so that we know where everyone's scope actually lies and there's no crossover. If you've ever been in a turf battle in this building over scope of practice, you wouldn't forget it. So I just want to make sure that that's delineated very clearly.
Okay, thank you. And I believe I missed.
Sorry, Ms. Sidran, if you would please just identify yourself before you speak for our secretary. Thank you.
Yes, I'm sorry. I apologize. This is Corinne Sedgren with the Board of Opticians. I did want to clarify. I believe I misspoke earlier when I spoke about scope of practice within Section 18. Scope of practice will still be addressed under a definition of ophthalmic dispensing. This is what we want to clarify with respect to standards of practice, not scope of practice, meaning when they can or cannot issue a prescription, how they are going to qualify which lenses are up to par and which ones aren't before they're dispensed. So we did not mean for these regulations to go into issues of scope of practice, but just standards of practice.
And thank you, Madam Chair, very much. I think what I'm going to have to do is pull out their current chapter and lay this next to each other page by page to just kind of figure out what the real changes are and go from there. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Vice Chair, for your questions. Next, Assemblymember Considine.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Assembly Member Anderson, for bringing this. And my question is for Mr. Sedran. And I may be getting a little confused on this, so I appreciate you explaining this to me. But going back to what Vice Chair said about the regulations versus having something in statute, in Section 9, you have the board shall adopt regulations establishing reasonable fees for, and then that list. And I noticed in the current NRS statute, those are listed, and there's fees from $100, $250, $300, $500, depending on what all of those issues or requirements are. And then the last line in section 9 says that this is for the cost to reimburse the board for the cost of carrying out the provisions of the chapter, except that no such fee may exceed $500. And there are already now some that are $500. And reading that in conjunction with section 15, where the board will be employing an executive director and other employees to establish their duties, fix their salaries. I guess what my question is, if they're in regulations, they'll be easier to change. But with all of this happening at once, are there reserves to pay for any of those salaries, or will that automatically trigger like all of those fees to go up to $500 to meet the requirements to reimburse the board?
Oh, okay, thank you. Yeah, so to answer your question, I'll go first to the fees section, the new fees section.
And if you would please just remember to identify
I'm so
yourself.
sorry. Yes, Corinne Sedgwick. I'm the executive director for the Board of Opticians. I apologize. I'll do my best. So again, with this section 9, the fees provision, we really wanted a consolidated fees provision. And the reason we left out the individual caps was simply because we wanted to leave it open to potentially do biannual renewals or renewals for a length of time that is different than just the annual cycle, particularly with respect to apprentices who might be licensed for only 2 years before they get their optician's license. So that was the reason for leaving off the caps. We kept the $500 cap simply because that was the highest cap available in the statute. However, if we need to amend this to include individual caps again and keep them where they're at, that's not a problem. We're open to doing that, but that's just why we left it more open-ended. As far as the reserves, yes, we have reserves. We can function. We're not going to be desperately increasing fees or anything in the coming year. And that wasn't the intent here. It was really just for flexibility for the renewal cycle and just that issue primarily.
Thank you. I know I'm a freshman, so my short time here, what I continue to see, and thank you for allowing me to follow up question, Chair. What I continue to see is that the fees are actually put in statute, so that I guess they are a little bit potentially takes more time to change them, but also that, again, as to the Vice Chair point before, so that they can be seen consistently across all the different boards, so we know what they are. So I just didn't know if that, if there is a reason to not keep them in statute as opposed to putting them in the regulations when most seems to be in statute. Thank you.
Madam Chair, may I answer?
Yes, just please remember to identify yourself for the record.
I will, thank you. Corinne Sedgwick, Executive Director for the Board of Opticians. So in answer to your question, we did follow the models of other occupational licensing boards when creating this statute, and we did it piecemeal. So we took some from some statutes and some from the others, but primarily we tried to follow the example of the Board of Occupational Therapy because their statute was so clean and concise and clear cut. That is one of the few statutes where they do not delineate the individual fees. And so we followed that prototype. However, again, if the legislature is more comfortable with individual fee caps, that's something we can certainly put in. That wouldn't be difficult to change.
Thank you.
Thank you. Next, we will go to Assembly Member O'Neill.
Thank you, Chair, for the time. Ms. Sedgwick, I may have misunderstood you, but I want to question on section 17, actually 17 and also section 15, but 17, did you say other boards, you're modeling this after other boards that accept gifts, grants, et cetera, and donations to conduct your business, and that it can, you mentioned about it influencing your investigations?
Yes, sir. This is Corinne Sedgwick, Board of Opticians. We did model this one particular provision on the Board of Massage Therapy, Massage Therapy Board. And theirs was a general provision relating to all operating expenses of their board, that they were allowed to accept gifts, grants, and donations. We did see a provision similar to our current provision, which only pertains to investigations, and that was in the Board of Psychological Examiners statute. And the reason we thought it did not fall under investigations was, again, because our investigations are supposed to be confidential until the board takes a formal public action. And so it just didn't seem to make sense to gifts, grants, and donations for that particular purpose when that gift, grant, or donation is going to be public. That was our thinking. Again, we've never taken gifts, grants, or donations that I'm aware of in the board's history. So this is not any provision that we're married to. We just wanted to move it here because we want it to be more generally based so there wouldn't be a conflict of interest when doing investigations.
I appreciate that. I've got to say that I think I still have a little, some issues with a licensing board receiving any kind of grants, gifts, donations, that it could possibly influence them one way or another unduly, or even who's a member of the board if the person trying to get on the board gives one gift versus another person not. And with that in mind, Chair, may I ask one other question regarding salaries of the employees? And
Yes, Assemblymember O'Neill, please.
thank you, Chair. The other one, Ms. Sedrin, is, as I recall, I think it was LCB audit, or it may have been during the last year or so, did an audit where another agency or commission was allowed to set their own salaries, et cetera, and they were quite excessive. What control would there be with the board may set the salary? What supervision over the board is there?
Current Sedgwick Board of Opticians, are you specifically referring to the salary of the director or the individual board members?
Well, the board members are already set of not more
Right.
than 50. I'm looking at sections 15 sub 2.
Okay.
On page 8 of the original bill, starting at line 12.
Right. So in answer to your question, there wouldn't be a provision in here. There isn't one currently. And as far as I know of, the other board occupational licensing statutes do not address the compensation of the executive director or other staff. That's, as far as I know, always set in public meetings and as part of the public budget that's submitted to the LCB every year. In our particular case, we're such a small board, our compensation is never going to be excessive just because it would bankrupt the board. However, there would not be, a provision in here to prevent it from being excessive. But again, it's not a provision that's currently in the statute. And what we've really done here is switch the original statute alluded to a board secretary, and we're changing the language to board director just to reflect the current title and current practice.
Thank you, Ms. Setter. Thank you, Chair, for the time. I appreciate it.
You're welcome, Assemblymember O'Neill. Members? Vice Chair Carlton?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the conversation about gifts, grants, and donations, that's pretty much boilerplate language that we put in a lot of different places. There have been boards in the past that have gone for a grant to increase their technology. They've received donations to possibly do community service, go out and maybe do a mobile van of some type where they can take their services out into the community. I understand where there might be some concerns, but I think we all have to remember they're all appointed by the governor. All board members have to sign statements of disclosure. They have to comply with all the ethics rules in the state. This just allows the boards a little bit of flexibility to maybe do some of the things outside of the actual licensing regime. Sometimes a group will want to come in and do a presentation or hold a virtual class for all the licensees to help keep the cost of their continuing education credits down. So they may get a grant for that or a donation from a foundation to do an educational function. So this is pretty much boilerplate that we put in a lot of places. You'll even see it in a number of state agencies so that money can be accepted. I know for a while a few years ago, we had to add it to DPS because someone wanted to make a gift to cover some things for some officers, but they weren't allowed to do that. So it's just so the committee's aware. It's fairly typical, and I don't see any real issues with it, knowing that there are some accountability factors built in.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carlton, for that clarification. I think it's helpful for a lot of the newer members on the committee. Assemblymember Kasama, I saw you had a question as well.
Yes, I did. Thank you, Chair, and thank you for the presentation. My question also relates to Section 6.3, where, again, we have at least 5 years of work experience. My question is, what is typically done in the other states? I'm just kind of curious. I just want to make sure we're not more restrictive than other states, because I don't know about optometrists, but I know certainly in the medical field we have a shortage, and I just want to make sure we're not being more restrictive than other states.
Sure. Ophthalmic dispensing is a bit of a, I'm sorry, Corinne Sedgren. I will be better, I'm sorry. Corinne Sedgren, Dispensing Opticians Board. We are in a unique situation with ophthalmic dispensing because it is not nationally, it's not predominant among the states to license ophthalmic dispensers. I believe it's 22 states now that issue some sort of license or certification for ophthalmic dispensing. So, with respect to your question about is this standard with other states, I would say with the other licensing states, yes, 5 years is pretty standard. However, again, this is not a profession that is regularly licensed in all 50 states. And some of the states that do license, they issue more of what is called a certification. And so they do not require all the comprehensive training and education that we require here in Nevada. But yes, 5 years is pretty standard for license transfers.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, that actually brings up a question for me. Ms. Sedgren, you just said that all the other states do not require as comprehensive, well, the amount of training that we do, a comprehensive training program like we do. But then Section 6 sub 2 says that anyone holding a license or, like you said, a certificate in another state can just come into Nevada and we would give them reciprocity, basically, is what Section 6 sub 2 says. And yet we're going to hold them to a lower standard. Like, so the standards in Nevada, like you said, are very high, the comprehensive training program, and yet we're going to grant this license without any training to someone who's coming in from out of state who has a certificate that might have gone through less training. That's a little concerning to me.
Okay, yes, Corinne Sedgren, Board of Opticians. So a couple of things in response to your question. First of all, we do not have any intention of lowering the standard. And actually, we did change the language here under subsection 2, where we say holds a corresponding valid and unrestricted license in a state or district with licensing requirements that are substantially similar to the requirements in this state. And the reason we specifically added that language in there is because the current statute does not specify that the licensing requirements have to be substantially equivalent. It just says any license from another state or U.S. territory. And so we did run into issues of people trying to transfer from another state where the licensing requirements were not as stringent as our licensing requirements. And I want to clarify too that this subsection, when we're talking about waivers, only applies to the sections 6 through 7.100 pertaining to the apprenticeship training program. The apprenticeship program involves the education and the on-the-job training components of the licensing structure. However, it does not exclude these people from having to take the national exams, the certification requirements, any other requirement of the board. It just pertains to those on-the-job training and education requirements. We just want to accommodate those for coming from other states that have substantially equivalent requirements. If not, they still need to have the 5 years work experience, and they need to show competency, prove competency by taking our licensing national certification exams and any other exams adopted by the board.
Thank you, Ms. Sidran. And I think that would make me more comfortable having that substantially equivalent language. I think as it's written right now, it's a little concerning. So I look forward to seeing that amendment. I also have another question on section 26. I'm going to need you to walk me through this increase in fine again one more time. I know you touched on it when we were going through the presentation, but it's a little concerning that we're raising a fine from $1,000 to $10,000 for each separate violation. So can you walk me through what the thought process there was again in section 26 when we're raising that fine on the employer when looks like the violation might have been by the employee?
Correct. Yes, Corinne Sedgren, Board of Opticians. Thank you for your question. Madam Chairman, I believe the board's reasoning in this was just that oftentimes you have an unlicensed individual who's dispensing under the direction of the employer. That unlicensed individual doesn't even necessarily know the laws pertaining to ophthalmic dispensing or that it's that there's a licensing requirement. And so the idea is that if the person is the employer, they need to know the laws in Nevada regarding their employees. And if they don't, then they should be the more culpable party. They should be subject to these higher fines as opposed to the individual. However, that said, there are situations, of course, where the employer does not know what's going on with their employee. And maybe they're not the on-the-job manager. Maybe they just don't know what the employee is doing for whatever reason. And so the $10,000 is a cap. It's not necessarily our initial fine that we would issue. And more often than not, we usually end up doing some sort of an agreement, a settlement agreement, if there's some sort of an imposition of a fine. But that was the board's reasoning for increasing the cap on this particular fine. But again, we're open to an amendment if this is an issue.
Okay, so you guys said, you mentioned that it's not typically your initial fine, so that's something that you have spelled out in regulation then?
As far as the regulations, I believe the fines are put here. But yeah, you're correct. We would need to address that maybe like a tiered situation in the regulations or a tiered provision denoting when we would, impose each type of a fine or what each amount of the fine. But I don't believe we have that in the current regulations.
Okay, thank you. Members, I didn't see any other questions, so I jumped in, but I'm going to do one last check. Is there any other questions?
Madam Chair, if I may.
Yes, Vice Chair Carlton.
Thank you. And along the section that you were in, and I was kind of waiting to see if someone brought it up, we've had a lot of conversations about cease and desist in this committee over the years. And I see cease and desist in that section that you just referenced, but it didn't really get totally vetted. So what would be the process for issuing a cease and desist? Because that's serious. That's taking someone's job away. So we want to understand, is there any judicial review? Are you going to do the citation first? How do you plan on doing this? Because that's a pretty serious thing for a board to take on.
Okay, thank you. And this is Corinne Sedgren, Board of Opticians. So the situation with the cease and desist is currently in the current statute. So this language has not changed. We haven't added that. What we have added is a citation authority. Cease and desist, what we've normally done is start out with a warning letter, which is not a judicial cease and desist, I understand. But we send a warning letter to any person that we have knowledge is dispensing without a license. And then if they don't comply, if we send in an inspector and they're not compliant, then we move forward with judicial action, including a hearing if we have to order them to cease and desist. But under our current statute, we actually have the ability to issue a cease and desist immediately. So that's not changing. But the citation authority, what we're trying to accomplish with that is just give this a little bit of teeth. So we're not sending a letter, saying, please stop dispensing without a license. They ignore us. And then we have to launch immediately into a very expensive hearing to make them stop. We're not trying to deprive anybody of their employment. We just want them to cease and desist the illegal activity, which is dispensing the prescription lenses without a license. So there's no reason why they have to shut down their business or why their employer needs to dismiss them. It's just that particular activity, which is dispensing the prescription lenses to the customer.
And if I may, Madam Chair, could you please tell me where you have that authority? Because as I'm reading this, I see a lot of delineated language and rewriting. And I know sometimes when legal does things, they group things together for, statutory construction. Could you give me the citation where you currently have cease and desist in your NRS?
Corinne Sedgren, Board of Opticians. It is now section 25 of the bill, but the original is NRS 637.181.
And there is a process that goes along with that.
We follow a process. We follow a policy in the office. As far as there being a process, this is the process that's delineated in the statute. So we always initiate a warning letter. And then if we decide to go forward with a hearing, it'd be a 233B letter.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to make sure that we clarify that if you already have that opportunity to do it, because as I read through this, it almost looks like new language, but I just wanted to make sure that I had that citation. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay, members, last call. I don't see any messages through Skype for questions, so I'm going to look for a show of hands. Okay, seeing none, we are going to move into the testimony and support portion of the bill hearing. Broadcasting, can we check the telephone line for those wishing to testify in support, please?
Yes, Chair, to testify in support on AB 391, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, if you wish to testify in support on AB 391, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in support at this time.
Okay, let's move into testimony in opposition.
To testify in opposition on AB 391, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Again, to testify in opposition on AB 391, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
Okay, thank you. Can we check for those wishing to testify in the neutral position?
To testify in neutral on AB 391, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 166, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller, yes, you are unmuted. Caller 166.
Hello, you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Hello? Oh, great. Yay, technology. My name is Christopher Grimm, Grimm, and I am testifying on behalf of Warby Parker. Chair Howdy, members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify on AB 391. Warby Parker is a vertically integrated eyewear brand founded in 2010 with a mission to provide designer eyewear at affordable prices. We have a customer base that we've built of millions using technology to offer prescription eyewear online and in our 120 plus stores across the country, including one in Las Vegas. By circumventing traditional channels, designing glasses in-house, and engaging with customers directly, we provide high-quality, better-looking prescription eyewear at a fraction of the going price, starting at just $95. Warby Parker was also founded to be a positive force in the world. For every pair of glasses that we sell, we distribute a pair to someone in need. To date, we've distributed more than 7 million pairs of glasses to people in the United States and abroad. We are currently considering making Nevada home to our new West Coast lab, which will be a manufacturing site to better serve our customers on the western half of the country. We're still reviewing the language in this bill. I believe there's a lot of good here in terms of updating the licensing requirements and the general regulations on opticianry. We're still digging through. I think as everyone on this committee is aware, there's a lot to go through in this bill. We're looking at things very, very closely. If we have any issues, we look forward to working with the sponsor, the board, and others to sort of work out any issues that come up. And that's why we are neutral, because we're still just sort of going through all the language and reviewing everything. So, hopefully we will be able to work out any issues that may come up. Hopefully there won't be any, but we just wanted to sort of publicly offer our testimony, and I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you for your testimony, Mr. Graham. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
Chair, there are no more callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblymember Anderson, would you like to give any closing remarks?
Thank you. Very quickly, thank you, because I know you have 2 more bills to be heard. Greatly appreciate the amount of time, and it's pretty clear that there's still just a little bit more work that we need to do before it's ready to be voted out during a work session. So thank you so much for the questions and clarifications, and we'll try to get those back to the committee right away.
Thank you, Ms. Anderson. Okay, with that, I will close the bill hearing on Assembly Bill 391. At this time, I would like to turn the virtual gavel over to my Vice Chair, Vice Chair Carlton, to open and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 290. Vice Chair Carlton, the gavel is yours.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. With that, I'd like to go ahead and open the hearing on Assembly Bill 290, provisions relating to financial institutions. I would invite Chair Howdigi to open up the hearing and introduce any presenters and go through the bill. Welcome, Chair Howdigi.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carlton, and thank you, members. I know we've had a long afternoon, so I will keep my remarks brief, but I am Assemblywoman Sandra Howdigi. I proudly represent Assembly District 41, and I'm here today to present Assembly Bill 290. I'll keep my remarks brief and say that I was happy to allow one of my bill draft requests as a vehicle for this proposed bill. I have Mr. Robert Waltz, Vice President, Associate General Counsel, Business and Personal Trust with Charles Schwab here, and I promise you he will do a much better job of presenting how Assembly Bill 290 will benefit Nevada. We also have Mr. Jeff Brown, Senior Vice President, Head of Legislative and Regulatory Affairs with Charles Schwab, here to help answer any questions. With that, Madam Vice Chair, I would like to turn it over to Mr. Waltz with your permission.
Thank you very much. Please go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chair and Madam Vice Chair. I'm Robert Wolz. I'm General Counsel of Charles Schwab Trust Company here in Nevada, and the Assistant General Counsel of Charles Schwab Trust Bank, which are the 2 financial institutions that we now have, Schwab now has here in Nevada. All of you are familiar with Schwab. I don't know that you're necessarily familiar with how Schwab has a long history of banking institutions here in the state going back over 20 years, which started with Charles Schwab Trust Bank, which was a federally chartered bank originally headquartered in Reno. Currently, we do have the 2 charters, Charles Schwab Trust Bank, which is focused mostly on institutional trust, providing trust and custody services to employee benefit plan clients, and Charles Schwab Trust Company, which is a personal trust company located in Henderson. We started that about 5 or 6 years ago. It's been growing. We've just gone over $1 billion in assets and became profitable more quickly than we thought we would. Charles Schwab Trust Bank has about $300 billion in client assets, and Charles Schwab Trust Company now in Nevada has about $1 billion in assets. It is also the parent corporation of our other non-depository trust company, which is a Delaware trust company, which has more in assets, but together it's about $11 billion for our entire personal trust business. That business is headquartered here. Our senior management is here in Henderson. We have been growing here in leaps and bounds because we found that Nevada really provides us an excellent opportunity to conduct these businesses here, particularly in the personal trust space, because we are able to avail ourselves and offer to our clients the benefits of the cutting edge trust statutes that Nevada has on the personal trust side. It has been an easy sell for our clients since we've been here. One of the reasons we opened it is because we needed a presence on the West Coast. Not all of our clients wanted to be in Delaware, and it's been very warmly received. And what we're finding is that as our organization grows and evolves, we increasingly use our trust companies to not only benefit our clients in different ways, but also to facilitate objectives of the greater Schwab organization and our clients. And as that happens, our business grows. A couple of recent examples, we acquired last year USAA. That involved the Nevada Trust Company taking on new products, which involved having to expand our investment management suite and increase employment there. We also assist our broker-dealer in other areas to help them comply with their regulatory requirements by serving in roles such as collateral agents and things like that. And as we do that, our business grows. The number of employees we require in Nevada grow. So it's been a good story for us, and I think it's been a good story for the state. So as we go through this and try to expand the role of our entities, that's really the reason we're here today, because we're looking for some clarifications to some of the trust statutes to allow us to continue on that expansionary path, specifically with respect to individual retirement or IRA accounts that are now sponsored by Charles Schwab and Company, our broker-dealer. Currently, the broker-dealer is required to qualify under the Internal Revenue Code as a non-bank custodian, and that carries certain regulatory requirements along with it, which apply only to non-bank IRA custodians. The IRS rules allow a bank or a trust company to act as a custodian of an IRA program without any issues. So because of those regulatory requirements, and because our competitors, most notably the Fidelities and the Vanguards of the world, use a different structure where they use a trust company or a bank charter with trust powers to sponsor their IRA program, we are attempting to make that conversion here using one of our Nevada entities. So it's anticipated, if we get these changes that would help us facilitate that the Nevada entity that serves in this role will sponsor the IRA program for IRS purposes, and also act as the primary custodian for the assets of the self-directed IRA accounts currently custodied at the broker-dealer. And when I say self-directed, I want to clarify, these are IRA accounts that are invested entirely in publicly traded brokerage assets. This is not, there's some negative connotation to self-directed IRAs in certain circles, thinking that people are using these to invest in businesses and precious metals and things like that. There's none of that involved with this. These are purely broker-dealer platform financial assets that these IRAs are generally invested in. The trust company the Nevada entity would not be engaged in a fiduciary role, which we commonly define to be a role requiring the exercise of investment or other discretion with respect to the accounts. We are merely holding the assets, and we're dealing with those assets at the direction of our clients. We would not be offering investment management or anything of that nature that would give rise to fiduciary liability. So moving on to the bill, the draft bill really addresses two objectives that we're trying to clarify. Number one, that an IRA custodial relationship is a non-fiduciary role. This is a pretty much a standard position under federal bank and trust regulatory law, as well as the law of most states. The problem that we have seen as we've tried to clear the path to make this change is that the definition of fiduciary under Nevada Chapter 669 suggests that a person or entity that is defined under that statute as an administrator who possesses and controls any assets of an IRA account is in fact a fiduciary for purposes of Chapter 669. So when you talk about the language referring to possession or control, that suggests that a custodian with no discretionary authority over an account could be deemed to be a fiduciary, and that would not work for the model that we are proposing. The statute, on that point, the statute excludes from the definition of administrator under Section 660 or Chapter 669 a trust company or savings bank that sponsors a custodial IRA program. And again, the custodial IRA program is one where we do not accept responsibility for investment management or any discretionary authority. And also an affiliate of the trust company or savings bank that would potentially be holding assets or dealing with the assets of the IRA account. We would be using, as Schwab usually does, we use the best capabilities we can across our many affiliates to service our clients. So some of the activities relating to these IRA accounts will be performed under the direction of the trust company or the trust bank at the broker-dealer level, pursuant to inter-affiliate agreements that we are required to have as a matter of banking law. So we've also asked for a modification on the definition of fiduciary to Chapter 673. This relates to our Charles Schwab Trust Bank charter, which is a Nevada savings bank under Chapter 673. We have adopted the definition of fiduciary, or proposing the adoption of a definition of fiduciary there, which is derived from federal law and clarifies that a custodial role is not a fiduciary capacity for purposes of Nevada law for Nevada chartered savings banks. The second piece is a little less controversial and is more of a clarification, and that is we are asking to adopt under Chapter 673 the rules under what's referred to as Federal Regulation 9, which are the rules governing fiduciary activities of federally chartered banks. And the rules relating to proprietary bank deposits and collateralization of fiduciary funds invested in such bank deposits under those rules. We would like to have those rules apply to Nevada savings banks. This is merely an expansion of what you have already done. The rules related to proprietary bank deposits and collateralization have been already adopted in Nevada for bank charters other than Nevada savings banks by administrative regulation, Nevada Administrative Code 62100. And so we think that this is just an expansion of what has already been established as the policy of the state with respect to these types of arrangements. And with that, I would open it up for questions. I think it's fairly simple what we're asking to do, and we're happy to add anything to that explanation the committee deems necessary.
And thank you very much, Mr. Wolz. Mr. Brown, did you have anything that you would like to add?
Mr. Brown was here, Madam Vice Chair, to just help answer any questions. Or Mr. Brown, I see you in here.
As you just heard, yeah, I'm here to answer questions if you have them. My role is to head our Washington, D.C. office of legislative and regulatory affairs, and I'm happy to answer any questions that might relate to Schwab.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I'd like to, just so that I can totally understand this, I just want to make sure. So last session we had, I think it was last session, might have been the session before, we had a lot of conversations around the Attorney General's bill about fiduciary responsibilities. So how does this bill relate to that conversation? Is this a carve out of that bill? And are we losing any protections for the public in making any of these changes?
Well, I'm not entirely familiar with that bill, but I think you're alluding to the Nevada bill where there was some effort to impose certain fiduciary responsibilities on broker-dealers. This doesn't generally relate to the operation of a broker-dealer. The changes we're asking for relate to fiduciary activities of a bank, trust department, or in the case of Charles Schwab Trust Company, our Nevada Trust Company. There's a distinction in most trust businesses between a fiduciary business and what they call a custody or agency business. What we're talking about here is facilitating a custody or agency business. In a custody or agency business, your obligations are 100% defined by contract. We are not under a discretionary fiduciary standard to act in the best act in a discretionary manner with respect to the investment of the assets, the distribution of the assets, anything of that nature. It is purely an agency capacity. I don't think in this context it creates any additional risk. Again, these accounts are 100% directed by the account holders, the people that establish these IRA accounts. Where the trust company or the trust bank would not be providing investment advice. They would merely be administering the plan in accordance with the terms of the IRA plan, which is a creature of the Internal Revenue Code. The provisions of the Internal Revenue Code dictate what we can and can't do. Making distributions as directed and providing required tax reporting services as it would be required by the Internal Revenue Code.
And thank you very much, Mr. Walls, for clarifying that. It's always good to get those statements on the record so everyone understands exactly what everyone's role is in some of these complicated measures that and investment instruments that people use. There's a lot of them out there. I'm not sure I could, even if you gave me 4 or 5 cocktail napkins, I don't think I would understand them. So with that, committee members, are there any questions from any other committee members at this time of these two gentlemen? I believe I have Ms. Kasama.
Yes, thank you, Vice Chair Carlton. So my question is, under section, and Assemblywoman Heidi Kasama, District 2, under section 2, number 6, it sounded like this section here has a section that says the savings bank shall not allow funds awaiting investment or distribution to remain uninvested and undistributed any longer than is reasonable for the proper management of the fiduciary account and consistent with applicable law. So you were talking about a fiduciary or a more of the IRA directed accounts. You have instructions how to handle that. So I'm just wondering why this is even in here, because I have concern with this where if we're trying to regulate when somebody should invest or not, or, if the market's super hot, you don't want to put assets into that. You want to have it sitting in cash for a while. So if you could help clarify why this section is in there.
Sure. I'm glad to answer that question because it brings me to a point that I forgot in my primary presentation, and that is that language that you are looking at is actually drawn directly from the federal statute, which is the language that applies to other Nevada bank charters currently. But this has a little bit wider application for us because we do have accounts in Charles Schwab Trust Bank presently that are directed trustee accounts under ERISA, which are deemed generally to be fiduciary accounts. And those accounts are subject to these requirements. We are complying with those requirements now. We started complying with them when we were an OCC bank, and when we flipped our bank over to a Nevada charter, we had to go to the FID and say, what can we continue to follow these rules? Because there was a gap in the regulatory and statutory framework. There were no rules applicable to savings banks. We now have these rules in place, and again, these are the rules that for cash investments that are used for any trust company that's OCC regulated, that are used, I believe, for other Nevada charters under the regulation that I cited to you earlier. So it's nothing new. It's just a codification of the rules that we are working under presently with Charles Schwab Trust Bank with these directed trustee accounts.
All right, thank you.
And Vice Chair Carlton, if I could, I wanted to let the committee know, and I should have made the comments earlier, but we also have somebody with the Nevada FID available as well to answer questions.
Thank you very much. That was going to be one of my next questions if Mr. Reynolds and or the FID had been consulted and were part of these conversations to begin with. So if our person from FID is available.
I believe we have, I see that we had Sandy O'Laughlin signed in to speak, but I believe Michael Lewis with FID is available.
Mr. Lewis, are you on the line?
Chair, Michael Lewis is from Broadcast. That's me.
Oh, that's okay.
Wrong one.
Wrong one. Okay.
Michael Smith is the Nevada FID gentleman, I believe.
Wrong Michael, Madam Chair. I saw the Michael, but I do see that I had them signed in to participate, but I don't see them on, so we might have lost them.
Okay, that's fine. We can get our questions answered as we move through. So did you have any other presenters? Are there any other questions? If not, we'll go ahead and go through our other portions of the bill.
Just to answer your question, because I did sit through one of the meetings, the Nevada FID and Director Reynolds from Business and Industry were consulted throughout the process of this bill.
Okay, thank you. We always want to make sure our regulators have a seat at the table when we're looking at these things because they know them much more intimately than we do. So I just always want to make sure they're involved. So with that, I don't see any other questions from any other committee members at this time, I believe. Oh, Ms. Considine, I'm sorry. I apologize.
Oh, no worries. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Vice Chair. So I just had a couple of questions. One of them, if I'm understanding all of this properly, that the Charles Schwab IRAs are non-bank custodians, and those usually have regulatory requirements, but the idea of this is to not have those regulatory requirements. So my question is, what would those regulatory requirements be?
Well, let me this is Bob Wolves again. Let me give you a little history on that, how that worked. The reason those, and it's kind of odd in the context of Schwab because we are now one of the largest broker dealers in the country, but those rules were put in place because the IRS, when they implemented IRA accounts back in the 1970s, I believe, felt that a bank or a trust company was a properly regulated, properly capitalized entity to support an IRA program, and a broker-dealer was not. So a broker-dealer was required to meet certain other requirements. The largest one is actually something called a net capital requirement, which causes us to hold back some portion of our capital at the broker-dealer that we could be able to put to use for a higher and better use. And we have to hold it here. As I mentioned earlier, our competitors are not using this model, and they're not subject to that requirement. So we are at a competitive disadvantage with respect to that. The other thing, and we've been actually talking a little bit to the IRS about this on another front, that we are now, our world has changed at Schwab. We've gone from being a broker-dealer centered business to a financial holding company. So we have the Federal Reserve looking at our capitalization. Our broker-dealer is subject to all of the Fed requirements. It's subject to the SEC requirements. It's subject to the holding company being required to be a source of strength in the event the broker-dealer has some financial difficulty, highly unlikely, but it has to be there. So we are in a highly regulated banking environment, and our pitch to the IRS has been, why do we, Schwab, need to do this when we have all these other capital requirements, which are pretty onerous and pretty effective in ensuring that the financial institution is run in a sound and prudent manner. So that's where we're at, but there's a capital requirement for that. There's some other reporting requirements that we would not be responsible for. But again, the thinking of the IRS statute under Section 408 of the Internal Revenue Code was that a bank's fine, a trust company's fine because they're regulated entities. Their capital is being monitored by regulatory authorities, whether it's the Nevada FID, whether it's the FDIC, in the case of Trust Bank, along with the FID, and that they are more than capable of serving in this capacity. A broker-dealer might not have been back then, but again, the script has kind of flipped over time as large broker-dealers like Schwab have evolved, and the IRS has not changed their rules.
Follow up, Madam Chair or Madam Vice Chair?
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay, so then if I'm understanding this properly, one of the reason or a couple of reasons those regulations would requiring holding more capital that you couldn't use for other things, reporting requirements, but this would take the savings bank out of that. So my question is then, what does that mean for any other savings banks in this state? What does that change for anyone else outside of Charles Schwab?
Yeah, it doesn't change the capitalization required of the savings bank. I'm sorry, we're talking about the capital being held at the broker dealer, because the broker dealer is the sponsor of the IRA program. We would move the sponsorship to the savings bank. Now, at that point, it would be up to the FID to determine, because the bank had taken on this additional responsibility, whether they might require us to put up more capital. That's a discretion of the FID once they get their arms around, what we're planning on doing if we happen to go this route. And so we're comfortable with that.
Okay, so does that change any other entities, broker dealers, savings banks? Does that change any other rules for anyone else in the state?
I believe I don't know for sure, and I would validate this with the FID, but I think we are the only Nevada chartered savings bank at the present time. We were the first one. We were here 4 or 5 years ago drafting the statute, and I think we are still the only one. There may have been one other, but I'm not sure. But that doesn't change anything with Nevada law. What we're talking about is getting relief from an IRS-imposed obligation that they would place on the broker-dealer if we continue in our current structure.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Considine. Are there any other questions from any other committee members at this time for our presenters? I don't believe I see any hands being raised. So with that, I believe we can go ahead and move on. So with that, if we have anyone, broadcast services, do we have anyone in the queue lined up in support of the bill, AB 290?
Thank you, Chair. To testify in support on AB 290, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 306, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Chair and committee members. I am Sandy O'Loughlin, Commissioner of the Financial Institutions Division. I'm here today to testify in support of AB 290. This bill makes changes to NRS Chapter 673, Savings Banks, and NRS Chapter 669, Trust Companies, allowing employer-sponsored IRA investments. The bill's requester worked with the Financial Institutions Division prior to submitting the bill for clear content. At this time, we do not anticipate any amendments. I want to thank you for your time, and I am here to answer any questions the committee members may have.
Thank you very much. We appreciate that. Committee members, are there any questions?
Madam Vice Chair?
Our regulator? Yes, Ms. Considine?
May I ask the same question that I'd asked Charles Schwab is, does this change make any changes to any entities other than Charles Schwab in the state?
Caller with the last 3 digits of 306, please press star 6 to unmute.
Sorry about that. This is Sandy O'Loughlin for the record. At this time, Charles Schwab Trust Bank is our only savings bank in Nevada, so it would really only affect them at this time.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Considine, any other question?
No, thank you, Madam Vice Chair.
You're welcome. With that, all right, thank you very much. We can go to Our next caller in support, if there is one.
Thank you, Chair. Caller with the last three digits of 131. Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Good afternoon, Vice Chair Carlton and members of the Assembly Committee on Commerce and Labor. My name is Connor Kane, CONNORCAIN, and I'm testifying in support of Assembly Bill 290 on behalf of the Nevada Bankers Association. We want to thank Chair Howdegui for bringing this bill and would also appreciate your support. Thank you for the opportunity to testify.
Thank you, Mr. Kane. Short and sweet. That's the way we like it. Thank you very much. Next person in support, Broadcast Services.
Chair, there are no more callers in support at this time.
Okay, if we could go to opposition, please, if there are any callers in opposition.
Yes, Chair, to testify in opposition on AB 290, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in opposition at this time.
All right, and with that, if we could go to those that might be in neutral, please.
To testify in neutral on AB 290, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers in neutral at this time.
Thank you very much. So I'll go back to the sponsor. Chair Howdegui, did you have any closing comments?
Thank you, Vice Chair and members of the committee for giving me the opportunity to present Assembly Bill 290. I just ask for your support and consideration of the bill. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. With that, we will go ahead and close the hearing on Assembly Bill 290, and I will turn the virtual gavel back over to the Chair for our last bill in this afternoon's agenda. So with that, Chair Howdegui.
Thank you, Vice Chair Carlton. Committee's always in good hands with you. Members, the last bill on our agenda today is Assembly Bill 277. So I will open the hearing on Assembly Bill 277, and I believe we have our very own committee member, Assembly Member B. Duran, here to present the bill. Ms. Duran, when you're ready, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, Chair Howdegui and committee members. For the record, I am B. Duran. I'm representing Assembly District 11. I'm here today to present for your consideration Assembly Bill 277, which helps streamline the personal injury claims process after a motor vehicle accident. Madam Chair, when Nevadans are involved in an auto, motor vehicle, or motorcycle accident, their only focus should be their recovery, getting healthy to get back to their family, job, and life. Unfortunately, I'm all too familiar with the reality that too many Nevadans do not have the health coverage they need. Consequently, after a car accident, instead of following all medical professional recommendations, Nevadans ask themselves, can I afford this? Imagine a single mother who is on her way to work driving through an intersection with a green light and a distracted driver plows through the same intersection, impacting her. If that single mother, like many Nevadans, does not have adequate medical insurance and only has limited liability insurance, she will depend wholly on the distracted driver's insurance policy to cover all her medical expenses. Understandably, before undergoing any medical procedures, the single mother would have to know whether or not the distracted driver's insurance policy would cover it. Under current law, the only way she could find out if the distracted driver's policy will cover her expenses if she files a lawsuit. That can take a long time. That forces her to get an attorney, and that further overwhelms an already stressed and injured Nevadan. We as a society have a social contract wherein we agree all who operate a vehicle or motorcycle should have insurance to ensure where a mistake is made, the at-fault driver can make the injured person or person's life whole again. I hope to correct this major concern through this bill amongst a few other technical fixes that my co-presenter will discuss in great detail. Before handing over the presentation to my co-presenter, I would like to offer an overview of the important aspects of the bill. Section 1 of AB 277 requires the amount paid toward medical expenses after a motor vehicle accident be based on usual and customary charges. The bill defines usual and customary charges to mean the typical charges a healthcare provider would bill an uninsured patient. It also allows the payment to be deposited in a trust account maintained by the attorney of the insured person upon written request by the insured person. Section 2 of the bill allows the insured person, their attorney, or insurer to obtain all medical records, reports, and bills from the claimant or the claimant's attorney every 90 days. Oops. This section also requires that the insurer must disclose relevant facts or provisions related to the policy coverage, including policy limits with or without permission from the insured person. This concludes my portion of the presentation of Assembly Bill 277. Chair, with your permission, I would like to turn over some time to Graham Galloway with the Nevada Justice Association to share the background details for the measure and to address the technical aspects of the bill and to answer any questions there may be.
Thank you, Assemblymember Duran. Welcome to the committee, Mr. Galloway.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, members of the committee, Graham Galloway on behalf of the Nevada Justice Association. First, I'd like to begin by thanking Assemblywoman Duran for the opportunity to present this to you. As she indicated, there are two distinct components to the bill. In Section 1, we're addressing or we're requesting new language in an existing statute that covers medical payments, medical benefits coverages for automobile insurance. In Section 2, we're revisiting a bill that was passed in 2019, SB 435, which is a bill that covers the exchange of medical records and policy limits information. We learned after the passage of that bill in 2019 that there's a little bit of a problem with some of the carriers interpreting the language of the bill, and we're revisiting it to clean that language up so that there won't be any ambiguities, and won't be any conflicts or any problems. So let me begin by talking about the proposal or the changes in Section 1. Section 1 covers medical payments, medical benefits coverage, what we often just call or shorthand MedPay. MedPay coverage is a wonderful coverage. It's an optional coverage, but that's mandatorily required to be offered. The mandatory requirement requires a carrier to offer at least a minimum of $1,000 in medical coverage or MedPay coverage. We often see amounts or coverages of $1,000, $2,000, $5,000, $10,000. Rarely do we see anything beyond $10,000 in MedPay coverage. So what we're talking about here is small numbers. And it's a cheap, affordable coverage. I would encourage everyone listening today to review their policy and take a look at it and get as much MedPay coverage as possible, because it's a coverage that directly benefits you yourself. It's not based on fault, so that if you were in a crash that somebody else caused, it would kick in or it would cover you. If you caused the crash, it covers you. If you run your car into a telephone pole or an embankment or something like that, it covers you. It covers you if you're on a bicycle. It covers you if you are a pedestrian. It covers you if you're a passenger in your car. It covers you if you're a passenger in somebody else's car, and it covers your family members if they live with you. So it's a great coverage to have. And up until recently, it was a very simple coverage to administer. You would send your bills and records to your insurance carrier, and they would process them, and they would pay either your healthcare provider, they would pay you yourself, or your attorney. Recently, with increasing frequency, we see insurance carriers now disputing the amount of what they're going to pay. They hire outside vendors, outside companies to pour over the bills, and then they dispute the amount of the bills, and claimants are now left having to fight for a simple, cheap coverage that routinely in the past was almost automatically paid without there being any discussion. So the Section 1 of AB 277 requires a company to base the payment under the MedPay coverage on the usual and customary charges, not on some third-party vendor's belief of what the coverage or what the bill should be. My most recent experience was I received a letter from a carrier that said that their Kentucky third-party vendor said that the local bills, which were customary and usual, were not customary and usual. And we ended up having to file a lawsuit just to get an additional $2,000 worth of MedPay that was at dispute. So this makes it clear on how the MedPay benefits should be paid. Section 2 revisits a bill that was passed in 2019, AB 435. And that involves this trade-off, to use a frequently popular term now, quid pro quo, where an insurance company gets medical records and medical bills updated on a regular basis, and in exchange, the claimant, the injured party, finds out what the policy limits are, the adverse's policy limits. Just a brief little historical background for this, I think, is appropriate. In 1995, Farmers was tired of claimants just dumping hundreds of pages of medical records and bills on them at the last moment and being told you have 2 days to process these and pay us. And they proposed a statute, a bill that ultimately became a statute, wherein that claimants in a personal injury setting would be required to update the medical records and bills every 90 days to the adverse's insurance company, so that they would know what was going on. They could adequately set their reserves. And in exchange, the claimant or the claimant's attorney would receive policy limits information. This worked really well for 20 years until 2015, when Farmers came back to the legislature and they were not happy with the quid pro quo, weren't happy with the bargain, weren't happy with the exchange. And they had a bill at that point sponsored by then Senator Roberson, which effectively just eliminated the exchange. It wiped out NRS 690B-024, which was the statutory embodiment of what now is, or was SB 430, no, whatever the bill was at that time. I apologize, I can't remember the bill number, but it wiped out the statute. So for the past, or for 4 years, up until 2019, claimants weren't entitled to get the information about policy limits that they needed. In 2019, we sponsored SB 435, which was approved, but unfortunately, some of the language there has been interpreted to allow insurance companies to escape their obligation to provide policy limits information. So the second section of AB 277 simply is a cleanup of SB 435 from 2019, and makes it clear that claimants are now entitled to receive policy limit information. So these are two distinct concepts, but they're basic, they're very simple, and they're for the benefit of all. Frankly, I think the exchange of information to the insurance company benefits them, and as claimants, you get the benefit of knowing how much insurance is out there. The question that was asked in 2019 that probably be asked again today, why is it important to get that information? Well, then a claimant would have information, will know how much coverage is out there. So if they have ongoing medical treatment or need ongoing medical treatment, they know what they can afford, what's going to be covered and what's not going to be covered. So that's the overview of the two provisions in this bill, and I thank the committee for allowing me the opportunity to present it to you, and I'm happy to answer any questions that arise. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much for your presentation, Assembly Member Durand and Mr. Galloway. I'm going to open it up to questions from the committee, but before we go to the committee, I want to touch on something that you said, Mr. Galloway. So the section of this bill, I think it's section 2, sub 4. So this is something that was prior law prior to 2015, and then you said that Senate bill in 2015 stripped the language away. So this isn't something new. This is something that existed in law before.
Correct. And then we had a 4-year, Madam Chair, Graham Galloway on behalf of the Nevada Justice Association. That's a good question. Yes, for 20 years, we had a statute that allowed for the exchange of this information. Then there was a 4-year period where the statute was completely deleted from the Nevada revised statutes. And in 2019, we went back to, we brought forth SB 435 to bring us back to where we were prior to 2015. But the language was slightly modified in 2019, so that created an argument by some insurers that they don't have to comply with the requirement of giving over the policy limits.
So then, no, this language that's being introduced, would this take us back to the language prior to 2015 that existed for 20 years?
Madam Chair, Graham Galloway, again, yes and no. It brings us back to substantially similar language, but it's a little more clearer about the obligations imposed on the insurers and on the claimants. The original language from 1995 through 2015, I think, is susceptible to the same interpretation that some carriers are now giving the language from 2019. And so we changed it slightly to make it much clearer that if a claimant requests the policy limits information, it's not necessarily tied to an insurer's request for medical records. So some have argued that the two requests are linked. The new language in the present AB 277 delinks the two requests, which is a slight difference from what the pre-2015 language was.
Thank you, Mr. Galloway. Okay, I'm going to go to Assembly Member Tolles next.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I appreciate that's a good transition actually to my questions in regards to section 2, subsection 4. And I'd like to just follow up, if I may, Mr. Galloway, on the point you just made that for 20 years there was an exchange of information, and that this proposal, as it reads, feels one way. So the exchange only goes one way, where there's a requirement to disclose the limits, but there's not the mutual exchange of information for those medical records. Did I hear that correctly?
Assemblywoman Tolles, Graham Galloway on behalf of the NJA. Yes and no. I think that's my fault. I don't think I was particularly clear. There still is a mutual requirement for both sides of this equation, or I shouldn't say mutual. There is a requirement of disclosure on both sides. If a carrier, under the new language, if a carrier requests, an insurance company requests medical records and bills, or an authorization that allows them to obtain the medical records or bills, claimant has to give that to them. If a claimant requests the policy limits, the carrier or insurance company has to give them that. So they're not linked together, but there is a mutual obligation. It's just that one side or the other has to take an affirmative step and request that information.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Follow up?
Yes, follow up, Assemblymember Tolles.
So thank you. That's perfect, because that dives into my question about the last line in subsection 4, which was that the insurer may but is not required to obtain the consent or permission of the party covered by the policy for the disclosure of the policy limits. And so I think if I'm hearing you correctly, that the situation you just explained in terms of exchange of information required that policyholder to agree, consent to release that information. That was the process that was put in place for each, the insurer as well as the representative of the insured. But this takes out that permission step. If I'm reading that correctly, and could you just explain more why we're including that?
Okay. Assemblywoman Tolles, Graham Galloway, again on behalf of the NJA, that's a good question. That actually is not language that I was personally in charge of, but it's language in there. And the intent of that is to prevent any argument or any excuse made by the insurance companies to prevent the exchange or the release of the information regarding policy limits. Being close to California, we often deal with California representatives who, although they're adjudicating or adjusting claims in Nevada, they still have a California background. And in California, there is a statute that requires the insured to give permission for release of the policy limits information. We don't have that. We've never had that. There's never been a requirement. This language is just to head that off and make it clear that that's not required. Now, if a company wants to ask permission of their insured, they can, but it's not required. And the exchange of the medical records and bills, that's through the claimant, and the claimant either authorizes it or their attorney authorizes it, the individual's attorney authorizes it, so that's with their permission. So it's just a preventative clause or language in there to prevent that from being raised as an issue. I view it as just anticipating the next move on a chessboard.
Thank you, Chair, for the questions. Thank you, Mr. Galloway, for the answers. And just to be crystal clear, so we don't have a similar provision of language that applies to the insurers, though, where they can get that information without permission?
Assemblywoman Tolles, Graham Galloway again. I'm not sure exactly what you're asking me there. If you could clarify that, I'd be happy to take a stab at it.
Chair, with your permission, my last question.
Sorry, I was on mute. Yes, Assemblymember Tolles.
Thank you. I'm just trying to wrap my head around this, and I really appreciate you answering the questions. So this language that essentially the information can be released about policy limits with or without consent. I'm just wondering if that's also the case for medical records, that can be released with or without consent, because I'm pretty sure I heard you say that only could be released with consent of the individual.
Graham Galloway on behalf of the Nevada Justice Association. Assemblywoman Tolles, the releasing of the medical records and bills is inherently done by consent because either the lawyer or the claimant releases that information. So the consent's kind of built into it. So there's no language that's comparative to the language in subsection 4 regarding the insurance company going to get consent from their insured to release the policy limits. So just by definition, when you give up your records to the insurance company, you're consenting, and the way the statute's written, I don't think you can refuse the consent. The statute's written that when a company asks the claimant for records and bills, they have to provide that. There's really not an option the way I interpret and read the statute or the bill.
That makes sense. I understand, because when you get, medical treatment, then you bill it to your insurance. I get it. Thank you.
Okay, we will go to Assemblymember Marzola next.
Thank you, Chair. And my question is sort of a follow-up from Assemblymember Tolles. So just so I can, I don't know why my video just went off. Just so we can be clear. So section 2, subsection 1 and 2, we as lawyers are obligated to give the medical records upon request by the insurance company. Do I read that right, Mr. Galloway?
Yes, Graham Galloway on behalf of the NJA. Assembly Member Marzola, you have read it correct.
Okay, so then we go to subsection 4, which then discuss the insurance company now releasing the policy limit upon the attorney's request. But I guess my issue is from line 29, starting where it says the insurer may but is not required to obtain the consent or permission of the party. Do you foresee cases to where the insurance company is not going to release that policy limit because of either, maybe saying they can't get a hold of their insured, or, they're waiting for their insured's response? I hope my question makes sense.
Graham Galloway on behalf of the NJA. Assembly Member Marzola, your question makes perfect sense. And the answer to that is that this language is anticipatory. That has not been an argument raised by Nevada adjusters, Nevada companies. On occasion, because we deal with a lot of claims representatives who are domiciled in California, they've raised it, and then we have to take the time to point out that they're not practicing in California or adjusting a claim in California, but they're in Nevada, and that in Nevada there is no such requirement. So the language here is just anticipating, and again, I don't mean to be flippant, but it's like a chess move that we hope that this won't be raised. So we put this language in there to make it clear that you can't raise that argument because that's what happens if you deal with California cases. And I practice in California, and it's amazing how often that the insured doesn't give permission, so you never end up with that information in California. And frankly, you're advising your client with only half the information you really need to have to properly advise them. So the short answer to your question is that I anticipate that might come up, and that's why that language was put in there or placed in there.
Thank you for that answer, Mr. Galloway. Follow-up, Chair, really quickly.
Yes, follow-up, Assemblymember Marzola, please.
Thank you. Do you think that maybe it would make it cleaner if we were able to take out that sentence? So just like us as lawyers would be required to give the medical records upon request, then the automobile insurance would be required to provide us with a policy limit upon request?
Graham Galloway on behalf of the NJA. Assembly Member Marzola, yes. As I indicated earlier, this wasn't necessarily language that I proposed. So if it had to be removed, I think it could be severed from the rest of the bill and do no harm to the intent and purpose of the bill. I just would hate to have to be back here in 2023 to add this back in the event that some enterprising claims person or insurance company decides that maybe that is something that they have to have. But under existing law, they're not required to do that. So yes, this could be considered to be taken out or removed.
I appreciate that, Mr. Galloway. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Assemblymember Marzola. Members, any other questions? Assemblymember Kasama.
Thank you, Chair. My question relates to section 1.3, where we have the usual and customary charges. Why are we not using the word actual? So if somebody's foot is broken and maybe that costs more to fix than the usual and customary, for whatever reason, why are we not? Because that just seems, now we have to track what's usual and customary. Why don't we just use actual? That seems pretty straightforward.
Graham Galloway on behalf of the NJA. Assembly Member Kasama, I struggled with this language here. Actual is not necessarily a bad term. I kind of like it. So that would be something we could consider, and I would be happy to discuss that with you further and any other invested parties. The language used was difficult to come up with, and so actual might be a good alternative.
It seems simpler than everybody's not trying to figure out what it is or track it. And usually I could just see regulation growing around that, and actual just seems to keep it simple. So I might recommend that to the bill sponsors to consider. Thank you.
Members, any other questions? Okay, let me check chat one more time. Okay, with that, we will go ahead and move into the support portion of the bill hearing. Broadcasting, can we check the telephone line to see if there are any callers wishing to testify in support?
Yes, Chair, to testify in support on AB 277, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers for support at this time.
Okay, let's move into those wishing to testify in opposition.
Testify in opposition on AB 277, please press star 9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 263, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 263, please press star 6 to unmute.
Hi, good afternoon, Chair Howdigi and members of the Commerce and Labor Committee. My name is Jesse Wadhams, Jessewadhams, with the law firm of Black & Wadhams representing the Nevada Insurance Council. We are opposed to AB 277 as written. With regard to Section 1 dealing with MedPay, we have a couple of concerns there, particularly with the language kind of discussed in the usual and customary component. That's not really a known or defined term, as you guys have heard. Part of the other issue is that there is a current body of law with regard to MedPay in a particular situation with the hospitals and with other providers of health care, and that law is now codified. It came from 2017, and it was codified now at NRS 449A. And this process that would be contemplated by AB 277 kind of creates some confusion there. So we would want to chat with the sponsor about cleaning that, at least getting some clarity around that. With regard to Section 2, obviously, we have discussed policy disclosure limits over the course of multiple sessions, and for those of you who were on judiciary have certainly been a part of that. I do want to focus actually on what that disclosure, actually particularly the component of the disclosure of the declaration page, means. As we know, all of us with cars must have insurance. And the insurer, we pay our insurer to defend us. There's a whole body of law in Nevada that requires the insurer to have a duty to defend. So that declaration page contains a lot of information. I went and looked back at mine. It's not only my name, my address, my wife's name, all of the cars that we have, the VIN numbers. And if my kids were slightly older, it would include their names. It includes a lot of information that is personal and sensitive. And we actually have another body of law, NRS 603A, that looks at a lot of that information and makes it private. So we would want to work with the sponsor and with the proponents to clarify that. Again, I think the questions with regard to that disclosure and whether or not the individual has the right to prohibit disclosure, I think that's an important policy consideration, and I think one worthy of having, because as noted, the policy doesn't belong to the insurer. It belongs to me as the insured, and my information will be disclosed. I think it's an important conversation to have. With that, Chair Hadegi, I am willing to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Wadhams. I'm glad you were able to make it on. I know you had a little technical difficulties right at the beginning. Members? Okay, it doesn't look like there's any questions, so we will take the next caller in opposition.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 145, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
Thank you, Chair. Doug Harris for Farmers Insurance. We are opposed to this bill. Under Section 1, the language does not contemplate those providers that may charge less than what a usual and customary charge would be. Thus, if we have to pay the usual and customary charge, but the billed amounts or the reasonable and necessary charges were less than that, we'd create a windfall. That coverage is designed to pay for the bills that are incurred, not an unknown amount that might or might not be billed for the treatment rendered. It also, frankly, requires the payments to be deposited into the attorney's account, which likely will then be taken and used to negotiate those bills further, thus creating a greater windfall. We're no longer paying for the amount of the bills, we're paying for an arbitrary amount that is not necessarily what is actually incurred. As far as the disclosure of limits, have some concerns about some of the language in the prior bill. The requirement was to release all bills and records for the treatment provided. They've eliminated that and removed that to the provider. So I anticipate we will get what we got in prior to 2015 when we took issue with this bill, and we'll get one record, we'll get the limits disclosed, and then we'll see nothing for 2 years until we get a demand dropped on us with substantially more medical records, multiple treaters, and no ability to investigate that claim, set appropriate reserving, and investigate the injuries. Additionally, the current bill does not allow the attorney to revoke the medical authorization without cause. They have removed that language to allow the attorney to revoke the medical authorization really for any reason whatsoever. So it takes away some of that quid pro quo as was described earlier, and we are left with the release of policy limits being a one-time event, and now the authorization has been revoked and we have no ability to obtain any ongoing treatment records. So I thank you for allowing me time to testify.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller, please.
If you recently joined the call and would like to testify in opposition on AB 277, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Caller with the last 3 digits of 902, please press Please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin. Caller with the last 3 digits of 902, please press *6 to unmute, please.
Yeah, this is Mark Seckman with the American Property Casualty Association. M-A-R-K, last name S as in Sam, E-K, T as in Tom, N as in Nancy, A-N. I'd just like to associate myself with the comments of Mr. Wadhams and the gentleman from Farmers. Thank you.
Thank you for your testimony. Broadcasting, next caller.
Caller with the last 3 digits of 983, please slowly state and spell your name for the record. You will have 2 minutes and may begin.
This is Joe Gild, Joeguild. Good afternoon, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I'm here representing State Farm Insurance companies. And a reminder, a lot of people don't know this, but State Farm is a mutual insurance company, and therefore the holders of the policies are co-owners of the company. And for that reason, protection of the privacy of citizens at this time, including the policyholders of State Farm, is a paramount policy consideration in this country. Section 4 of Section 2 of the bill, where it requires the release of an entire declarations page with a lot of sensitive information that Mr. Wadhams already talked about, is entirely irrelevant to the issue at hand. And it's completely unnecessary to establish one single fact, and that is how much insurance does the person have. So that's one concern that State Farm has to protect its policyholders. The other thing is also that I'd like to mention is also in Section 4, Section 2 of the bill, and that's this disclosure of policy limits, and it should be irrelevant to how much a claimant is owed to be made whole. There's no connection there, and so we're opposed for that reason. And most jurisdictions in the country do not require the disclosure of this kind of coverage to a claimant's attorney. With that, Chair Howdegui and members of the committee, thank you for the opportunity to testify to you this afternoon, and I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, broadcasting, next caller, please.
Chair, there are no more callers in opposition at this time.
Thank you, broadcasting. Can we check the telephone line for those wishing to testify in the neutral position?
To testify in neutral on AB 277, please press *9 now to take your place in the queue. Chair, there are no callers for neutral at this time.
Thank you. Assemblywoman Duran, would you like to give any closing remarks? Oh, you're on mute, Assemblywoman Duran.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Chair Howdegui and committee members for allowing us to present Assembly Bill 277. The bill helps to streamline the personal injury claims process after a motor vehicle accident. We look forward to working with any stakeholders for any proposed amendments, and I would appreciate your support of AB 277. Thank you.
Thank you, Assemblywoman Duran. I will now close the hearing on Assembly Bill 277. Next item on our agenda is public comment. While we are waiting for those listening over the internet, while we are giving time for those listening over the internet, time to call in, I'm going to read through our public comment housekeeping script. I would like to remind those present that the period for public comment is an opportunity to discuss general matters that fall within the purview of this committee. The public has already been given time to support or oppose specific legislation. We open and close hearings on bills so that we establish a record of the public testimony on the bill. Therefore, public comment is not intended to be a continuation of a bill hearing. I'd like to remind the public listening that we do limit public comment to 2 minutes, and please address your remarks to issues that fall within jurisdiction of Commerce and Labor. If your remarks are issues over which this committee has no jurisdiction, I will have you redirect your remarks or terminate them. Be respectful of the committee members and other witnesses. Do not comment on testimony provided by other speakers and do not make personal attacks. You may always submit written remarks for inclusion in the meeting record. With that, broadcasting, is there anyone on the telephone line wishing to give public comment?
To take your place in public comment, please press *9 now to join the queue. Chair, the public line is open and working. There are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much, broadcasting. Members, that wraps up our afternoon agenda for today. We will stand in adjournment until 6 p.m. this evening. Thank you. We are adjourned.